Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and happy Halloween. Halloween is my absolute favorite holiday of the year, so I figured to celebrate, we do a video that is very different from what I normally do here. Normally, a video like this would probably go up on my second channel, G's Corner. But you guys know me, I'm a variety gamer. I play a wide range of video games, and I know there's a lot of people that watch this channel that aren't familiar with a lot of games outside of things like Call of Duty, Fortnite, and Apex. So I figured now would be the perfect opportunity to maybe introduce you guys to some of those games. This isn't necessarily my top 5 because, oh my god, that really just depends on the day. There's so many amazing horror games out there. This is just like 5 games. Don't look at this as a top 5, but rather just 5 games that I thought of at the moment that I'm kind of in the mood to play through again for the sake of, you know, the Halloween spirit. The first game that immediately comes to mind, it doesn't even have to be Halloween, man. Any day of the year, you need to pop this in and play it at least once if you haven't touched it before. Resident Evil 4. I have many versions of this game. I didn't feel like pulling them all out, but I ordered a GameCube version. I have the Wii version, PlayStation 2, PS4, Xbox One, 360, PS3. I literally had the iOS port, and if you don't know anything about that, I'll put up a screenshot up on screen so you can know what I'm talking about. Like, that's how dedicated I am. I have every version. But anyways, this is a phenomenal game. I've been playing this at least once a year. Usually it ends up being like 2 or 3 times a year. I'm just addicted to this game. I've been playing it ever since I was like 7 years old. If you don't have any way to experience this game, almost dropped it, but if you don't have any way to experience this game, or if you just don't have the money to be spent on extra games right now, I totally understand. Normally they put these on sale on the digital storefronts for about like $5, $8, somewhere around there. You can also pick up copies on eBay for probably no more than 10 to 15 bucks, I bet. But if you really don't have any way to get it, actually just a couple weeks ago, I posted an entire Let's Play of this game. It's all in one video. It's a 6-hour video. Just watch it from start to finish. You can enjoy the game with me. And I also kind of cheated with this list because while talking about Resident Evil 4 and like some of the other games here, there's like other games that kind of get lumped into it. So if you're gonna play this, I would also say like maybe go through Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, especially if you have like the original versions of those games, or maybe even some of the older ones like the Resident Evil 1 remake, Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil Code Veronica. There's been a lot of Resident Evil games. Resident Evil 5 and 6, while they're good games, I would say skip those because those aren't spooky Halloween games. Those are just more like creepy action games. I would say like play 7, especially 7. That's an amazing Halloween game. Next up, unfortunately, I don't own this one physically, so I can't show it to you guys, but it is the Dead Space trilogy, Dead Space 1, 2, and 3. Now, if you don't have the games right now, I would not say go out and get them. However, if you have Game Pass, they are included with EA Play. And obviously now EA Play has been lumped in with Game Pass, so you can still experience those games if you're on Xbox One, Xbox Series X, whatever. You can download the game and try it. They still hold up phenomenally well to this day, and that is one of the reasons why I'm kind of saying, like, the remake coming out soon, it's not really necessary. I mean, it's nice, don't get me wrong. The remake looks amazing, you know, looks like all photorealistic or whatever. But if you go back and play the original game from 08, it holds up just as well, and it's still absolutely terrifying. Next up is another game that I also do not have, but I am planning on ordering it when I get paid again, and that is Silent Hill 2 and 3. I'm going to be getting the HD collection because, let's be honest, dude, I'm not paying $400 for freaking Silent Hill 2 on PS2 or Silent Hill 3. I know that one's like $500 or $600 as well. Please, no matter what kind of collector you are, never spend that kind of money. The secondhand video game market is ridiculous. And there's also a remake of Silent Hill 2. I don't know when it's coming out exactly. I don't believe they actually announced any release dates when they did the announcement trailer, but keep your eye out for that. I know the HD collection is like the worst port, you know, you don't want to play that one, but I'm like, I still want to at least experience it because I've played the HD collection before. And yeah, from what I can remember, it was pretty bad. I mean, it was still somewhat the same experience, but not really. All I can remember is that I looked down at my Xbox 360. I was like a half hour into the game, and this was when I was still younger, mind you. Even in my younger mind, I looked down at my 360 copy, and then I looked over at my PS2 copy, immediately turned off my 360, turned on the PS2, and went to play the original. I was so disappointed with the HD collection. But it's something nowadays where I'm like, okay, I don't have Silent Hill 2 or 3 on PS2 anymore, unfortunately, and I still want a way to at least experience the original versions to some capacity. So even though it's more or less like a beta version of the game, might as well. Anyways, next up, I would highly recommend Bloodborne, but if you don't have Bloodborne, I would also recommend Dark Souls Remastered. I know a lot of you don't have access to Bloodborne because it's still a Sony exclusive. Exclusives are stupid, but that's a conversation for another day. But Dark Souls Remastered is another great one. I actually just finished this game for the first time a couple weeks ago. That's also on my channel if you want to see that experience. That was pretty great. I edited the whole 12-episode series into like a 40-minute video. Like, the whole game is there in 40 minutes. That was a fun project. But anyway, highly recommend this game. The vibes are unmatched, and I don't even think it was like intentional, but this is like the perfect Halloween game. There's so many like spooky parts, and especially for me when I get down to the sewers and you see the giant rat. I have a huge rat phobia, literally made me cry. I haven't actually fully completed Bloodborne yet, but I've played like a couple hours of it before, and I can tell you, it even gives me goosebumps, and it takes a lot to, you know, give me the chills and stuff like that, but dude, Bloodborne will do it. The atmosphere in that game, the sound design, just like the design of the enemies, and like how fast-paced it is, you're like always on your toes. It is a great adrenaline pumping type of like spooky game, you know what I mean? My final recommendation, of course, is The Last of Us. I know this is gonna be on like a ton of people like Halloween lists. The second game I wouldn't say is perfect for Halloween, not as perfect as this, because this game leans more into like the horror and the creepy side of it, and like throughout the game, it's not necessarily a horror game. It's more, you know, obviously the story is about the connection and story between Ellie and Joel, but like the creepy atmosphere of it all and like the clickers and all that, like that's a huge part of the game, like the whole creepy, spooky, on your toes atmosphere. However, if the other games I mentioned are just a bit too intense for you, I definitely recommend this one. This one, I'm not going to call it lighthearted, but it definitely has some more laid-back moments where you can kind of just chill with the controller, not worry about like a bunch of massive chainsaw maniacs like charging at you. You know, this has the moments where you can pet some giraffes, but it also has the moments where you're fighting giant bloaters that explode, vomit, and completely blow you into 5 million different chunks. There's tons of other games I could shout out, like the Outlast series is amazing for Halloween. Alan Wake is another amazing one, dude. That game, oh my god, it is so good, and they had that remaster that came out. Phenomenal. The Amnesia games, Soma. I'd say Bioshock, maybe not Bioshock 2, but definitely like Bioshock 1, that would be a good one. At first I was going to say Bioshock 1 and 2, but 2 is definitely a bit more action heavy. Bioshock 1 really has that like atmosphere. The Dead Island games are always great to revisit. Doom, The Evil Within, and The Evil Within 2. Oh my god, actually, I wish I would have made those part of my core list. Those games are so overlooked. I would also recommend Little Nightmares 1 and 2, possibly Limbo and Inside as well. Those are all like short within, you can beat them within like 2 to 4 hours. I will say though, Limbo and Inside will kind of have you tearing your hair out at some point. Specifically Limbo, that one's a little tough, but the atmosphere is worth it. The Walking Dead Telltale games, those are always a great one for Halloween as well. Hollow Knight is another great recommendation. And as badly as I want to go down the rabbit hole and start listing off a bunch of games from the PS2 generation and before, the reality is most people aren't going to go out hunting for those games, and a lot of them are quite expensive nowadays. So, I mean, if you guys want a video like that talking more about old horror games from like PS2 and before, just let me know. I can do that, but those are just the ones from like PS3 and upwards, games that are more easily accessible, I would say, that came to mind when it came to making this list. The only old game I can recommend, though, that should be accessible soon if the leaks are correct, is Dino Crisis on the PS4, PS Plus, like, premium tier or whatever. The leaks are true, and Dino Crisis 1 comes to the service. You need to play that one. Anyways, yeah, now I want to hear from you guys. What are your guys' go-to Halloween games? Do you guys have any that you just tend to revisit every single year around this time? Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm sorry if I sound a little weird today. My allergies are going berserk right now. But I just wanted to do a bit of a different video and show you guys my top 5 favorite games of all time. Now, these games are not in any particular order because trying to rank these, I just can't do that. I'm not gonna go too in-depth in talking about these games. I'm just gonna give like a brief overview of it, tell you guys what the game is, and then from there, I highly recommend that you guys check these games out if you haven't before, because all of these are absolute masterpieces in my opinion. First things first, I guess we'll go in the order that the games released. So first off, Resident Evil 4. This is easily, honestly, I said these weren't in any order, but in terms of the game that I hold closest and dearest to my heart, it is Resident Evil 4. Take a look inside. Oh my gosh. This is like the old school days, okay, when they still put manuals inside of the games. Now the question is this one fully in color? Oh no, it's in black and white. That, you know what, I kind of expected that because for those of you that don't know, basically any of the greatest hits games, especially during like the PS2 and Xbox generation, they would do anything possible to cut back on costs when it came to making these editions of the game. Part of that, unfortunately, was turning the manual black and white, but it is what it is. Eventually, I do want to get like a black label copy of Resident Evil 4 so then I can have the in-color manual. Yes, I am quite an avid video game collector and I do care about little things like that. It really does make a difference when, you know, you open up the case, you see the manual there, it's all in color, and you just have like the complete in-box experience. Again, you know, every time that I'm buying games, I try to avoid the greatest hits ones because I like being able to look at my collection and it's just like a consistent stream of black labels. But again, if I'm buying a lot and it's a really good deal that I just can't pass up, then I don't mind if there's like a greatest hits label in there. Put in perspective just how much this game means to me, yesterday during during the state of play that was happening. Me and a buddy of mine were watching it together on the Discord watch-along feature, and as soon as they showed Resident Evil 4 Remake gameplay, I started bawling like a baby to a point of where I couldn't even see the gameplay because tears were just flooding my eyes to that extent. Like, I don't want to go too in-depth with it right now, but this game got me through the absolute hardest times of my life, multiple different times and multiple different eras of my life. I might talk about that one day. It would definitely be one of those, like, cliche Resident Evil 4 save my life type videos, but it truly did. This game means a lot to me. This is more than a game to me. Like, this is just, it's something I hold so near and dear to my heart. That's why I've always hated that argument that video games aren't art, because it's obvious that they are art. I mean, video games themselves, I mean, through and through, every aspect of them is art. The soundtrack, you know, music is considered an art. You got the concept art, like the drawings that make up what the final in-game models will be like. So not only is the process leading up to the in-game modeling technically art, but also just like the art itself of making the in-game models. I mean, I consider graphic design and like 3D animating and stuff to be an art. And then you got the coding process, which is essentially just writing, and writing is considered to be an art. So through and through, every aspect of video games will always be art, in my opinion, and that goes beyond opinion. It's just a fact. Video games are in fact art, and this is a piece of art that I will never let go and I will always cherish dearly. I'm not even kidding when I say all it takes is somebody turning on either this track called Serenity from the game or the save theme music for me to just start crying. Like, I will instantly cry tears of joy. Next up, this one came out in 2008, Lego Batman the video game. Now, I doubt there's many of you that haven't at least seen this game or played it before, but oh man, look at it. We still, wait, the manual is still in here. This is my original copy from 2008. I've had this game for 15 years, and as you can see, it's still in relatively pristine condition. When it comes to replaying Lego Batman, I have it on Xbox 360. I have it on PS3. I'm able to play it on my Xbox One through backwards compatibility, but for some reason, I always go back to the PS2 version. I always open it up and flip through the manual. As you can see, it's all in color, and I ended up buying this game for multiple other consoles as well. Like, I bought it for my PS3 recently. I'm weird like that. Even though I'll have a game for one console, I always end up repurchasing games on other consoles and platforms just so that I can experience the game again and see what the differences are, get the achievements and trophies on different platforms. I mean, I'm not too big into trophy and achievement hunting, but if I have the opportunity to afford the game again, buy it again, re-earn the trophies, and also play through it on a different platform and get that other experience, then I'll always do that. For example, Grand Theft Auto 5, when it first launched, I beat it on Xbox 360 back in the day, and then I beat it on PS3, and then Xbox One, and then on PS4, and then on PC. Now, next up, this is tricky to figure out which one to talk about. I guess in terms of release order, the one that I'm choosing to talk about next technically did come out before the other one, if I remember correctly. They were in the same year. Next up, we got Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. This is a game that I beat back on launch back in 2013. Unfortunately, I do not have the manual. I guess this copy that I bought didn't come with it, but that's okay. You may be wondering, where's the disc? Well, it's because it's in my PS3 right now. Like I said, I only beat this game once back in 2013, and I actually just did a replay of it like a week ago, and oh my gosh, this game holds up so well. Originally, this game wasn't in my top 5 of all time. It was easily in my top 10, but after replaying it and experiencing it again, and now that I'm a bit older, my brain's more developed, and I'm able to like catch on to all the little nuances and bits of satire and the dialogue. Now that I'm able to get like a full grasp on the story and the game's mechanics, this is in my top 5 of all time. And this game is tied with, well, honestly, all of these games' soundtracks are amazing. Like, if somebody was to ask me my favorite video game soundtrack of all time, these 5, technically 6 games, we'll get to that. They're all tied for me in terms of favorite OST, but in terms of the ones that I tend to revisit and listen to most, it would definitely be this, Resident Evil 4, and then there's one coming up that I won't spoil. It's probably going to be the last one that we cover. This game is just so satisfying to learn and play, and it's even more satisfying once you master it, you master the combos, then you get a grasp for how not only your main katana works, but then how to combine that in with your unique weapons. Like, the one that I always go to is the pole blade, because you can do that move, you go like triangle, triangle, square, square, triangle, and then you like do a few other combinations. I can't honestly remember off the top of my head what they are. I have to be holding the controller to know it and just feel the vibrations of the controller to know when I'm executing the combo right. You do this combo where you turn into a Beyblade and you start like spinning tornado speed on the floor, like you're skating across the floor. You have this pole blade, like you're just like holding it up. It's really hard to explain. You're just going Beyblade mode, cutting off these dudes' ankles. It is so sick, and it was one of my go-to combos in my most recent playthrough. And then again, don't even get me started on the soundtrack in this game. It is so anime. It is so metal. It is so good. I actually plan to buy the OST on CD here soon because it's that good. Every time that I go out for my runs or I'm jogging around my neighborhood, I just turn it on. Stranger I Remain, Rules of Nature, It Has to Be This Way, all amazing tracks from this game. Oh, especially It Has to Be This Way. If you never played this game, I do not recommend looking up that one though, because it plays during the final battle, and oh my gosh, when you're hearing the OST for the first time and I can't spoil it, just please play this game. It is available through backwards compatibility on Series X and Xbox One, and if you have a PS3, well, you can play it there. Unfortunately, no way to play it on PS4 or PS5 yet, but it's also available on PC. Right now, actually, since the 10th anniversary just happened a couple of days ago, it is still on sale on Steam. So if you never got the chance to play this masterpiece, please do yourself a favor and pick it up and play it. Next up, we got a 2-in-1. I know this is technically kind of cheating, but I really can't have one without the other, and that is The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. I don't care how controversial this is. I love both of these games to death, including the second one. In fact, I love and respect the second one for having the guts that it did to tell the story that it did, but especially the first one. Let's just focus on the first one for a second. This, again, there's a common theme with these games, okay? All of these games came in my life at times when I needed them most, when I needed to escape from real life the most, and I guess that's part of why I have such a deep emotional attachment to these games, and this is definitely one of them. I'm not gonna go too in-depth on what was happening in my life at the time, but this was there at the perfect time. I actually made like a huge essay piece on it a couple months ago. It was like 35-40 minutes long, something like that, and it was just me just talking about how this and the second game changed my life for the better, and how it changed my outlook on a lot of things, and how it got me to come out of my shell, actually like talk to people again. I mean, granted, to this day I'm still relatively the loner type. I still really never hang out with people, but if it wasn't for this game, I probably still wouldn't even text people, because back then I refused to ever text people. But like nowadays, that I honestly thank this game for teaching me that it's okay to come out of my shell, to accept love, to confide in somebody else when you need it most. Like nowadays, you know, I keep in touch with my moderators on Discord. I keep in touch with a lot of you guys on Discord. Like I've done a lot better in this last year about like coming out of my shell and actually talking to people. And when it comes to my mods on Discord especially, you know, we're really close friends in real life. So I've started allowing myself to, you know, get those things off my chest when I need to, and it has honestly helped a lot. And again, I thank this game so dearly for teaching me that lesson in the first place. And again, beyond the lessons that the game teaches you, like, this game in itself is just absolutely amazing. Similar to most other people, I bet, during the intro cutscene, I did cry like a baby. And many other times throughout this game, this is one of the most gripping games I've ever played. I beat this game in one day. It took me about 12 hours to do it, and I beat it basically in one sitting. Considering that this is a PlayStation exclusive, I know this is one that not too many folks have experienced, but next month, March, it is going to be coming to PC. So if you haven't experienced this game, well, you guys are going to be getting access to The Last of Us Part 1, which is a remake, essentially, of this game. It's the same game, everything's intact, just better graphics. So please, 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 if you've never played it, or if you've never given it a shot, please play it. And if you're on Xbox and you have no access to a PlayStation or PC, honestly, I recommend looking up like a full walkthrough on YouTube. You know, those people that post like 12 to 20 hour videos of them just beating one game in one video. I definitely recommend watching something like that, because the whole game in itself, you could honestly just kind of backseat game and watch this. Even with the gameplay segments, it plays out like one long 12-hour movie, and I absolutely love it. Hey, come on. The draft scene, top tier. So much life and beauty in such a dead world. I love that scene still to this day. And then The Last of Us Part 2, I have to say even less about this game, because this game is accessible to even less people since there's no plans for a PC release at this time. And plus, with this being a sequel, there's only so much you can talk about. A lot of heartbreaking moments in this game, and there's a lot of moments for even somebody like me where I just kind of had to sit and process everything and just go, oh, that just happened. A lot of deep cut and heart-wrenching moments in this game, but it's not all sad and depressing. There's also some great action in this game, just like in the first game. You know, you go up, you be shanking people, punching them in the face, shooting them in the face, all the usual fun video game stuff. There's not much I could say about it. If you played it before and weren't too hot on it, please give it another chance. And if you've never played it before and heard about the reviews and you're like, I don't really know if I want to play it, please play it for yourself. I will admit there's something that happens halfway through the game where you go, what? And you're just kind of waiting to get back to the point that it leaves you off on. It's like a mid-game cliffhanger that you return to about 8 hours later in gameplay. It's a little hard to explain, and it is a little jarring, but I can definitely say by the time that you reach the credits, it all pays off, and it's all entirely worth it. Like I said, even if you have played the game before, I highly recommend going back and giving it another shot. You'd be surprised by just how much this game will grow on you if you were the type of person to not like it as much at first, because I've seen a lot of people talking on social media about how, yeah, their first playthrough they weren't too hot on it, but then the second playthrough they started liking more, the third playthrough they started to understand it, and it just like clicked with them more and more and more. Personally, I've actually only played this game one time, but that one time was enough for me. Like, it was so good. These two games are definitely games I plan to replay and return to at some point, but considering I just did that within the last year, I'm gonna let them simmer for a bit before I return to them. I'm gonna give it like at least another year or two, maybe 3, and then I'll dive back in and re-experience it again so it's as fresh as possible for me. Last but definitely not least, and definitely the most controversial, Cyberpunk 2077. Yes, this is in my top 5 favorite games of all time. I am one of the people that was defending this game back at launch, and mind you, I played it. I didn't even have the PS4 version back then. I was playing on a base Xbox One, which was was objectively the worst platform to be playing this game on. I was playing the game at like 600, 720p at best, at like 15 to 20 frames per second, and I loved every second. And that is still the only way that I've experienced this game. I have not played the PS4 version yet. My only experience was with the base Xbox One, like the original VCR model. That's how I played this game, and I still loved every single second, and it still made its way into my top 5 games of all time. So I guarantee if I would have played it on a new system like a PS5 or a Series X, my experience would have only been better. This one is also a relatively recent release, and it is a bit of a longer game. I know it came out like almost 3 years ago. Oh my gosh, it's been 3 years since this game released? Anyway, that shocks. I can't believe it's been almost 3 years since this. If the iffy launch kind of turned you off, if you weren't too sure if all of the hype that this game got after Edge Runners was overblown, I can promise you it was not. This truly is one of the best video game experiences of all time, and considering the fact that they put out so many patches, and especially now, like if you go back to play it on a base Xbox One or a base PS4, it is much more playable now compared to launch. Like on base Xbox One, you can usually get a stable 25 to 30 FPS, which may not sound great, but if you compare it to launch, where, you know, even getting into a gunfight, you could be seeing anywhere from 10 frames to 15 frames per second, 25 to 30 is a lot better. Graphics in this game are absolutely stunning. The characters are amazing. The voice acting is also on point, and just the game itself, it all comes together so nicely. Like, it just feels like one massive connected and real world. Characters all work so well together. They all have great chemistry. Everybody's connected in a way that makes sense. Story is paced very, very well. You're taken from one point to the next without dragging out for too long, but also without going through it too quick. And I'm gonna just put this out there right now, between the two waifus in the game, Panam and Judy. Judy is mine. Like I said, I know I haven't gone too in-depth in actually talking about the games and the mechanics themselves, but it's because I believe in people playing games as blind as possible on their first playthrough. So that's why I didn't talk about them too much. I may go in depth on some of these games, like in a different video one day. Any of these games, including Cyberpunk, like if this is one that you've been turning away just because you heard about the negative launch, like please don't let that turn you away. Please experience this game at least one time in your life. The only thing that I will admit is that the combat it takes a little bit to get used to. I mean, it's not terrible by any means or clunky, not even close. It's just, it feels a little different from other FPS games. It takes a little bit to adjust to, but honestly, by the time you get like an hour or two in, you won't even notice it. So like I said, I apologize for not going too super in-depth on these games, but I also just wanted to leave this video as spoiler-free as possible. Just kind of talking about like the bare minimum, just in case any of you guys haven't played these games before. Yeah, these are my top 5 games of all time. Now I want to hear from you guys down in the comments. What are your guys' top 5, top 10, top 15, whatever it is? What are your top games of all time? As most of you probably know at this point, I like to make videos like this from time to time where we just kind of sit down and talk about games. And today I decided that I wanted to start a new series where we kind of go through and look at different consoles' libraries and look at certain games where I feel like they're just underrated or overshadowed or just don't get enough love in general. Now before we get into this, I just want to clarify, I don't think that these are the most underrated games on the PS2, for example. I just think that these are like 5 underrated games. So I could totally follow this video up in the future with like 5 more games that I feel like deserve more attention or more love, if you catch my drift. And I definitely want to expand and cover other platforms at some point, like 5 Xbox 360 games that I feel are underrated, or 5 SNES games that are underrated, for example. And for the most part, I'm going to be trying to sticking to games that I know I have in my collection so I can actually show off the physical copies to you guys, because, I don't know, that's just how I am. And one last thing before we get into this, I know this intro has been dragged out for way too long, but some of these games you're going to see are from some more popular franchises, and you may be wondering, like, how is that underrated? It's such a popular IP, but I'll explain it as we go. And one very prominent example of this is actually our first game, Crash Twinsanity. So again, you may be looking at this like, how is this game underrated? It's a part of one of the most popular franchises of all time, that being Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot is obviously a huge series dating back to the PS1 with Crash Bandicoot 1, 2, and 3, and then you had some of the spin-off games like the racing game and the Crash Party game. However, if you know anything about Crash Bandicoot, it's a series that definitely, how do I want to word this? It has quite the range when it comes to quality, so you know, you have like the top of the bar, you think like Crash Bandicoot 1, 2, and 3, and personally I'd put Crash Twinsanity at the top there as well. Then you have some other titles like Crash Tag Team Racing, Crash Boom Bang, for example, which some people would probably put, you know, a bit lower on that spectrum of Crash games. Personally, I still really enjoy those games, but I know there's a lot of Crash fans out there that definitely can't say the same. And Crash Twinsanity is one of those games where, compared to some of the other Crash games, it definitely gets more love compared to those not so liked Crash games. However, I feel like it definitely deserves way more love than it gets now, and I feel like it even deserves more love from like its developer and publisher. As most of you probably know at this point, Activision owns the Crash Bandicoot IP, so you know, if we could get a Crash Twinsanity remake or remaster, I would really appreciate that. Basically, to kind of give like a quick rundown of Crash Twinsanity without delving too deep into spoiler territory, it's a traditional Crash platformer, if I'm gonna be honest. However, the level structure is a lot different. So if you think back to like Crash Warp, for example, you had the warp room where you jump into different levels, you could choose between the different stages, and that was that. However, Crash Twinsanity, it's more of a story-driven, interconnected world. So as the story goes, you're taken to new locations, and inside of those locations, there's like mini hub worlds that you can interact with. It's kind of hard to explain, but it makes sense once you play it, and it may even sound bizarre as I'm sitting here trying to explain it, but each of these stages are basically like their own little hub worlds, but you're exploring these hub worlds, and the hub worlds drive the story forwards, and even after you finish up your business there, even after you finish up the story quest, for the most part, you'll be able to like go back, collect gems. However, that does lead to some complications. If you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about later on towards like the school section, for example, where if you happen to accidentally backtrack, you could actually end up repeating a certain part of the story, which I ended up doing on my first playthrough, and yeah, that was a little annoying to say the least, but I didn't mind because that level was actually pretty fun. There's also a lot of really clever nods in this game to previous entries, like when Cortex is like, the Wrath of Cortex didn't make as much money as we hoped it would. I don't want to talk about this game too much because this truly is a game that I feel like everybody should experience at some point, and hopefully we'll get a remake or remaster of it at some point down the line. But if you have a PS2 or an Xbox original, I highly recommend picking this game up. It is so much fun, and it's so good. It's personally one of my favorite Crash games. Call it nostalgia bias, but this may actually be my favorite Crash game. I know, I'm gonna be canceled by the community for saying that, but I genuinely love this game that much. Next up on our underrated PS2 games list, we have Burnout Dominator, easily the most underrated Burnout game. Again, this is one of those franchises where you're probably looking at it like, dude, honestly, that could apply to, like, the rest of the games here. Like, these are all from some pretty popular IPs and franchises. However, when I look at these games, I feel like these are the most overlooked, overshadowed, and underrated games of their series, if that makes sense. This is definitely one of them. I remember when this game released back in 2007, and I was absolutely blown away by it. If you go and look up gameplay of this game, I mean, even to this day, I mean, sure, you know, it may be a little fuzzy because it's on a PS2, and obviously all of those games run at 480i. Some games do run at 480p, but for the most part, a lot of games on there run between either like 480i, 480p, you get the point. But despite that, when you look at it on a fidelity level, like the graphics and textures themselves, it actually holds up really well. I honestly just love this game. Like, I have a lot of nostalgia for it. Oh my gosh, and the soundtrack in this game, it had like Avril Lavigne's song Girlfriend in multiple languages in the game. So every time that I hear that song now, I think of all the different versions because of this game. It had like the Spanish version and the Japanese version. One of my favorite aspects of this game was the way that it put an emphasis on reckless and dangerous driving. The game was pushing you to, you know, drive on the wrong side of the road, get those near misses, drift around corners, wreck into other enemies, take them out. Because the more that you took out those enemies, and the more enemies that you knocked out, and the more you drove dangerously, the more it would build up your boost meter. And then once you got your boost meter filled, it would change from being like the normal orange nitrous bar to being blue. And once it was blue, you had the potential to do more dangerous acts while you were boosting, which would then build up another gauge for you to get your nitrous bar instantly refilled as soon as this one would end. So say while your nitrous was blue, if you did like 50 near, it wasn't actually 50 near misses because that would be ridiculous. That's just the example rule. So say you get like 50 near misses, and then you would build up a secondary gauge where as soon as your primary nitrous would run out, your next nitrous bar would be automatically filled up, and you could just chain it infinitely and just blast past your opponents. It may sound a little broken, but I promise it wasn't, because it actually took some skill to pull these things off. Not to mention, I really like the car selection in this game. Sure, it wasn't like the biggest car selection in the world. It wasn't no Forza Horizon by any means, but it had a lot of cool cars, you know. You had like your bog standard like Ford 70s looking Mustang. You had like your Dodge Chargers in here, and you had some classier sports cars as well. I mean, if you look at the back, you can see some of the selection here. You know, you got your sports cars as well as some like older school cars here at the top. This game also had a really good career mode that kind of forced you to utilize like every aspect of mechanic in the game. It was a lot of fun, and I highly recommend this game. If you ever see it on eBay, Macari, or you know, at like a local retro game store, please do yourself a favor and pick it up. It is worth every penny, and it will be worth every second that you play the game. It holds up so well. Next up on our underrated games list. Now, this one is going to be really shocking considering just how big this IP is, but that is the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Now, again, this is probably one where you're looking at it like, How is a SpongeBob game underrated? This series and franchise is huge, but trust me, when it comes to like the PS2 and GameCube era and everybody thinks SpongeBob game, they automatically go, oh, Battle for Bikini Bottom, you know, that was one of the most revolutionary platforms of all time, you know, it was such a good game. However, nobody ever talks about the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game, which was essentially a sequel to Battle for Bikini Bottom. Was it an actual canonical sequel? Not technically, but it's kind of like a spiritual successor to it. Obviously, it's a tie-in game with the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. However, it runs off of the exact same engine. Most of the models are the same. It basically just took everything from Battle for Bikini Bottom, but kind of refined it to a certain extent. You know, fixed up some of the animations, fixed up just the way that the game feels in general, and then it converted it into this new format. So rather than it being like Battle for Bikini Bottom, where it's almost like open world at times, or open level, or open hub, or whatever you want to call it, it's more level-based, kind of. However, some of these levels are more open in their structure. So rather than it being like Battle for Bikini Bottom, where you have like multiple open hubs and mini open worlds almost to explore, it's kind of like open levels where it's like each of Battle for Bikini Bottom's levels, but it's on a smaller scale, and you're able to explore these levels. It also has like collectibles and things that you can go for. In fact, the one collectible is actually necessary for in-game progression, and that is one knock against this game that I hear quite often, just how, you know, there's a lot of backtracking, there's a lot of repeating levels in order to get the collectibles that you need to move forward in the story. Personally, I don't mind it because it forces you to actually, like, get good at the game. Whereas, you know, on your first attempt going through some of these levels, especially the ones that I think, like the landslide racing levels where you're racing against the clock, you know, the first time you go through it, you could probably easily do it, no problem. However, if you want to get the collectibles, you're going to have to actually get good at these levels and master them. And it's not like half of the game is backtracking or anything like that. Like, if you're actually engaging with the levels and challenges as you go, sure, there's going to be a little bit of repeating there, but not as much as if, you know, you try to just blast through the game and they get to the end and Mindy goes, oh ho ho, I'm sorry, but you're gonna need these certain collectibles, go back and get them. And the game actually does a good job from the get-go, like, explaining this mechanic to you and explaining, like, hey, you're gonna need to master some of these levels. There's a fine line between forcing you to repeat content just to pad out the time and having it be annoying, and then forcing you to actually master and learn the game to a certain extent, so then you can, you know, get the proper experience out of it, and that's what this game does. And again, this one isn't structured the exact same way as Battle for Bikini Bottom. It's more level-based, so then it has an easier time, you know, having, like, different locations so it can properly follow the events of the movie. That being said, I don't want to go on anymore. I don't want to spoil anything for you guys, so if you haven't played this game, or if you've been considering trying it, or if you just straight up haven't heard of it before, please do pick it up, especially if you enjoy Battle for Bikini Bottom, whether that be the original, or Rehydrated, or the Cosmic Shake that just released a little bit ago. If you liked any of those games, you owe it to yourself. Give this game a shot. Next up, oh my gosh, this is probably one of the most underrated movie tie-in games that I've ever seen, and that is Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. When you think about this era of gaming, you know, the original Xbox and the PS2 and all that, everybody's like, oh, Battlefront 1, Battlefront 2. But rarely does anybody talk about Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, or another game that I personally loved a ton back in the day, Star Wars Bounty Hunter, which we'll probably talk about that in a following episode of this series. But today, I seriously wanted to hone in on Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, because compared to any other Star Wars game, this one is easily the most underrated, the most overlooked, the most overshadowed, and it genuinely makes me sad. Movie tie-in games and tie-in games in general definitely have a bit of a so-so reputation, especially the ones that came out back, you know, during this generation. Personally, I've always really liked tie-in games. That's just, I don't know, that's how I am, okay? I like playing the Space Chimps tie-in game. I like the Monsters vs. Aliens tie-in game. I like the Finding Nemo, the Cars, the Ratatouille, the Shark Tales. Any of those tie-in games, I genuinely enjoy them. That being said, no surprise, I adore Star Wars Episode 3, so the best way I could explain this game, I mean, you've probably seen Star Wars Episode 3 at this point, right? So, you know, I'm still gonna try to filter out the spoilers just so I don't spoil anything too crazy for you guys, but all I'm gonna say is that it follows the events of the movie pretty closely and almost to a T. There is a few differences because this game was being made before the final script of the movie was finished, so you're gonna notice a few differences here and there, like, hey, that didn't happen in the movie, or hey, that's happening in a different way than it happened in the movie. So there's a few of those differences, but it's nothing too monumental, nothing that, like, changes the story to, like, a drastic extent. But basically, you're going through this game and think, like, oh, I don't know, like Dante's Inferno or the original God of War. Like, yeah, it's one of those. It's almost like a hack and slash lightsaber game. And as you go through the levels, you know, you're picking up, like, your level up point things, and you're able to, like, level up your characters and get all sorts of new abilities and combos. Because rather than this just being like a mindless button mashy hack and slash, which if it was just that, I mean, I probably still would have included it in this video just because I'm a sucker for Star Wars, but this game takes it a step further, and there's like this whole in-depth combo system, and there's different combos you can unlock, and different abilities you can unlock, and different ways to combine different abilities and combos to like deal out as much damage as possible. And the enemies in this game are actually really smart because if you try to hit them with the same combo time after time after time, they're gonna start blocking, they're gonna start adapting to it, which forces you to, you know, like switch up your strategy, try different combos, try different abilities, try different force tactics. Not to mention the fact that there's also like bonus missions in the game which allows you to play like certain events from other movies. The first one that comes to my mind is you can actually like play through the Obi-Wan and Darth Vader fight from A New Hope. Oh, and there's also one cool little thing that I'm not gonna spoil, but let's just say that while the normal ending of this game does follow the movie to a T, once you beat the game, you unlock a fun little alternate ending Easter egg, and that's all I'm gonna say. It's definitely something that you should just experience for yourself. Don't even look up any videos of it. Go play this game first and experience it for yourself firsthand, because it is worth it. Not to mention the fact that in this game, you actually get to play through the legendary battle between Anakin and Obi-Wan. Sure, the LEGO games have also done that, and you've been able to play through it in those games, but like this, you know, it's more of a realistic adaptation, I guess, where it tries to be as close as possible to the movie, and I'm just gonna say, it absolutely nails it. Now, this last one is easily one of the most underrated, one of the most overshadowed, and one of the most overlooked games on the PS2. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this one, and that is The Godfather, the game. As you can see here, you know, I have like a fancy limited edition of it with like the cardboard sleeve and the nice case. This is actually like an alternate case because this is a limited edition of the game. I actually have 2 copies of this game. I have one copy that is just like the standard normal edition. Then I also have the limited edition, which, you know, comes with the game and the soundtrack and a bunch of like bonus stuff on the DVD. This is one of those games where I am hesitant to actually go in depth and talk about it because I truthfully do believe that everybody should just experience it because, you know, you've played the open world games, you've played Saints Row, you've played GTA, you've played Watch Dogs, etc., but this is unlike any other open world game I played. The only thing that I can think would come somewhat similar to it would be like Mafia 3 because it has some similar aspects in it. It's loosely based on the movie. You're going to see a lot of the important events from the movie play out in this game. However, sometimes different characters will be in different places. Sometimes different characters will be delivering different bits of dialogue. Sometimes different characters will be involved in scenes that they weren't in before. Basically, the premise of the game is that you create like your own special character. Like you don't play as any specific character from the Godfather movie. You just create your own character from the start. You're a new character named Aldo, and you get to take part in and play through some of the most iconic moments in the Godfather movie, whilst also playing through like a bunch of new set pieces and moments that happen in the story that weren't actually there in the original movie. And one of this game's biggest claims to fame is the fact that you're able to gradually take over the entirety of New York City by extorting businesses and rackets. Basically, to sum it up in like the simplest way possible, you know, it's like your classic mafia story where you have all these different families at war. Your goal is to go and take out all of the other families, all of the dons, all of the businesses until you're like top dog and you're the only one left standing. And to do that, you got to go take over businesses, take over rackets, take out the opposing families' warehouses, and you get to actually play through all of this. You get to go to every single individual store. You get to go inside. You get to blast the place up. You get to grab the owner and, you know, punch him around and try to get him to give in and give up their loyalty to the other families. And, you know, it may sound like that may be like something that could possibly get repetitive over time, like going through an entire state and taking over the state shop by shop. That must get boring, but no, it never gets boring. And also, this game has a sequel on the Xbox 360 and the PS3 and the PC. It released 3 years after this game in 2009 called The Godfather 2. And it basically just takes everything from this game and expands on it. So whether you play the original or Godfather 2, I highly recommend either one. I mean, if I'm going to recommend any of them, I would definitely say go with this one first. Don't get me wrong, The Godfather 2 is absolutely amazing, and I love that game. However, like, I don't know if it's nostalgia or what, but it's just, this game holds such, like, a special place in my heart. So if you're going to play either of them, please play this one first, and then if you enjoy this one, go play The Godfather 2 because then it'll make you enjoy and appreciate all of the additions and changes that were made to the mechanics there even more. Whereas if you go in blind, it might be a little hard for you to grasp and you might not be able to appreciate it as much as if you would have played this one first. But anyway, those are just 5 underrated / overlooked / overshadowed PS2 games that I saw in my collection. I was like, man, these deserve some more love. So now I definitely want to hear from you guys down below. Have you heard of these games? Have you played these games? Do you like these games? Is there any other games that you feel are underrated or overshadowed. And if you want me to continue this series, please let me know, because I would be more than happy to do so. Like I said, I plan to branch out and, you know, cover other consoles and also, you know, revisit the PS2 in the future to cover more underrated gems on this console. If you guys would like to see that, then yeah, I would totally love to continue this series. You guys seem to really enjoy the last video that I did similar to this. It was called 5 underrated PS2 games, so now we're going to be looking at 5 underrated PS4 games. Just a few things I wanted to clarify before we get into this. Similar to the last video, this isn't like the 5 most underrated PS4 games, if that makes sense. This is just like 5 games that I feel like are underrated on the PS4. So if you guys want to follow up to this video, I'd be more than happy to do so. And also another thing I wanted to clarify, these games aren't like exclusive to PS4. I mean, some of them are exclusive to the PS4, but some of these games are available on other platforms. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into it. Hey, before we get too far into the video, just a friendly reminder that this channel is partnered with Boosteroid. If you go down to the description, the top link is an affiliate link to Boosteroid's site. When you use my link, not only does it help me out, but it also tells Boosteroid that I'm a worthwhile partner to keep around, so I'd really appreciate it if you guys could go down there, sign up, check out the service. For those of you that don't know, Boosteroid is a cloud gaming service, and if you want like my full review and my full thoughts on it, I'll have a card right up here that you guys can kind of just go click and watch my review on. It's not too long, but it covers everything that you need to know. Anyways, let's get back to the video. So the first game that I picked is Spyro Reignited Trilogy. Now you might be looking at this and it's like, hey, is this really underrated? And honestly, I do believe so, because when everybody talks about like, you know, classic platformer remasters, especially on like the PS4 and Xbox One, everybody talks about like, you know, the Crash Insane Trilogy and Crash Team Racing, but rarely do I hear people talk about Spyro. I mean, there is people that talk about the Spyro Reignited Trilogy, but I don't know, I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough. Basically, this is the original 3 Spyro games from the PS1 remastered for the PS4, Xbox One, and the Nintendo Switch. As you can see on the back there, it's got the original Spyro, Spyro Ripto's Rage, and then Spyro Year of the Dragon. These games, all 3 of them are obviously classics. See, I grew up with the original Spyro games on the PS1, as well as the PS2 Spyro games like Spyro Hero's Tale. So when I heard that this was coming out, I was beyond hyped for it, and I picked it up as soon as I could. This is a genre that I genuinely miss. I mean, you still have like, you know, your indies that are making these collectathon type games, and also like, you know, the SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated and SpongeBob Cosmic Shake, you know, those are in the same vein as this, you know, the classic 3D collectathon. But, you know, I wish that there was more games like this coming out. But in the same breath, the fact that games like these aren't made as often nowadays does kind of make them a novelty and does make games like this unique when they do come out. If you haven't played the original Spyro games, this is a great way to get into them. All 3 of these games are genuine classics, and they're all genuinely fantastic. Next up, we have the Crew Wild Run, or, you know, just the Crew one. This is essentially just a different edition of it that comes with, like, you know, DLCs and more cars and stuff like that. Where do I start with the Crew? I remember picking this game up back at launch on the Xbox One and playing with my friends, and, you know, I have a lot of fun with this game every single time that I played it. In fact, when this game first launched, I played nothing but this game for literal weeks on end. I have put literal hundreds of hours into this game. Whether you're playing alone, playing with your friends, it's always, I've always loved the concept of this game. Like, you get in your car, you pick your car, and you can drive across the entirety of the United States. Obviously, it's scaled down a bit. It's not like you're actually driving, like, the whole entirety of the United States. Like, it's not the entire country in the game. It's a bit scaled back, but still, it's a huge map. Like, sure, you are able to drive technically from, like, California to Florida in a matter of, like, 20 to 30 minutes, but still. It was super ambitious, and I also love the Crew 2. The Crew 2 was amazing, and there's another one coming out soon that I will be picking up as soon as I get the chance. Like I said, this is available on literally every single platform, so it doesn't matter if you're on PS4, Xbox One, PC. This game goes for relatively cheap. You can probably pick up a copy for like 10 bucks on eBay. One other feature worth noting is that, okay, around like 2013 to 2014, I had this weird fascination with racing games that allowed you to play in like first person behind the wheel, like Forza Motorsport, Forza Horizon, and the Crew allowed you to do that, so I was always in first person, just, you know, driving around the country. This game does have a story mode, but I don't know, man. Whenever I'm playing this game, I like driving, I like cruising. It's a good way for me to decompress. Next up, we have Battlefield Hardline, a criminally underrated first-person shooter, and probably the most underrated entry in the Battlefield series. Now, I know that, you know, this might be a little controversial. It's like, Battlefield, that's a pretty big FPS. How is that underrated? But I'm serious. Out of any entry in the Battlefield series, this one is hands down the most underrated. Essentially, it's like a spin on your classic cops and robbers show. If I'm gonna be honest, I didn't play a whole lot of the multiplayer in this game. I played a couple matches, and there's still people that play to this day, but whenever I revisit this game, and whenever, like, I want to play it, I'm playing it for that story mode. Granted, it's not too lengthy. I reckon you could probably beat it in about, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours tops. That being said, this is another one that goes for like, like $6-7 maybe on eBay. The story mode is an absolute blast. Again, it's like a cops and robbers show, and you're playing it from the perspective of the cops. However, it's not as cut and dry as it seems. As you'll see as you play the game, the cops, they aren't as clean as they seem. Some of them are actually a bit more corrupt than even the robbers themselves. And no, that isn't a spoiler. You can pick that up just from watching the trailers. There's also a bit of like a detective mystery element to it, and let me just say that you definitely won't be expecting what happens towards the end of the story. At least I wasn't. Next up, we have Days Gone. Oh my gosh. Okay, this game is criminally underrated. Like, seriously. So many people dunk on this game just because it had a rough launch, and yes, that is completely justified. I'm always sitting here preaching about the fact that, like, I hate the way that most AAA modern games release. If I could have it my way, we wouldn't be relying on updates to fix the games. Like, sure, updates are nice to, you know, fix certain bugs or patch out certain things in the game when needed, but, you know, I hate the way that games release nowadays, how as soon as you pop the disc in, you gotta wait for that day one patch. Half the time, the game that you actually get on the disc isn't even complete. That being said, despite the state that it launched in, and despite everything else, if you go back and revisit this game now, it is just... do I call it a masterpiece? You know what? That's not even a question in my mind. Yes, I'm going to say it. Days Gone is in fact a masterpiece. I don't know, there's something about this game, like from the time that I started it, it just clicked with me. When the game opens up and you're driving around on your motorcycles with Boozer, there's something about this game and the way that the characters are portrayed and the way that they're written, they clicked with me. And it's like, I felt that connection with the characters and to the world, like the entire way through the story. Like, I was so deeply immersed in this story. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I kinda no-lifed it and I beat the game in about like 3 or 4 days. And mind you, this is like a 30 to 40 hour game. I have a really similar story with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I beat that game in 5 days, and if you know anything about the length of that game, yeah, I wasn't really doing anything for those 5 days besides playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But anyway, back to Days Gone. If you dunked on this game just because the state that it released in, or if you weren't too sure on it back in the day, please just go back to it, and please see it all the way through to the end, because I'm not going to spoil anything. However, let's just say that there's a certain gameplay element that is introduced in the third act of the game, like a solid 20 to 25 hours in, where it's just like, oh my gosh, okay. I don't know how else to explain it, because I mean, that was literally just my reaction to it the first time that it happened. I was like, oh gosh, okay, this is happening, let's go. Some people criticize this game because that feature was like heavily advertised in the marketing, but then it didn't show up until like the third act. However, for me, I feel like if they would have made it a bigger part of the game, it could have ran the risk of becoming repetitive or kind of like, oh, okay, we're doing this thing again by the time that you get to the end of the game. But the fact that they like save their cards for the end of the game and then they just kind of like hit you with it, and it's used very sparingly. You only, like, if you seek it out, you can do it multiple times in the open world, but in terms of the story, you're only forced to do it in the story a handful of times. And the way that they kind of like drip feed it to you like throughout the game, like you don't know if you're actually going to end up coming into contact with this certain thing. I'm trying to be as spoiler free as possible with this, but by the time that you get to the end of the game and you actually like, you know, come into contact with it and you actually have to fight it, it's just like, oh my gosh. This game honestly had me on the edge of my seat for basically the entirety of the playthrough, even for the slower moments. By the time that I got to the ending, I genuinely shed a tear of joy. It was just, it's one of those things where I feel like everybody needs to experience it at least once. That goes for a lot of like Sony exclusives, like God of War 2018, Horizon Zero Dawn, The Last of Us games, Days Gone. Just a lot of these PlayStation exclusives are honestly just chef's kiss masterpieces. Now, for this last one, it genuinely hurts that this one is as underrated as it is. However, there's a reason why this game is so underrated, and we'll talk about that. So if you remember back in 2020, there was a certain game called Avengers that released, and yeah, not everybody was so hot on it between the live service elements and the lack of endgame content. Personally, the lack of endgame content really didn't bother me. Oh gosh, I hope you're okay. That was the sound of the case dropping, but thankfully it seems like it's okay. As I was saying, the lack of endgame content really didn't bother me. I'm the type of guy when I'm playing a game, I don't really care about endgame content or bonus content or whatever. I'm there for the story, like I'm there for the main path. I want to get through the main quest. You know, occasionally, you know, I'll veer off and do like side quests, side content if it really interests me, but otherwise, I'm sticking to the main path, I'm sticking with the main story up until the credits roll. And then once the credits roll, that's usually when I put a game down. I don't really see the need to replay most games or dive back in for more unless there's like an actual reason to. Like in Resident Evil 4 Remake, that was my one exception where as soon as I beat it, I started up a new playthrough just because like I couldn't help myself. Resident Evil 4 and now Resident Evil 4 Remake are both my favorite games of all time. But before I start gushing about that, let's get back on track. So with Avengers, while I personally actually love that game and love that story, I can understand why some people didn't. That being said, due to to that game's rocky reception, the next game that came from Square Enix basically just went below the radar, and anybody that has played the game knows how amazing it is, and it has since picked up in sales. However, it definitely never got the attention that it deserved right off the bat, and, you know, I won't tease it anymore. It's Guardians of the Galaxy. This game is truthfully amazing. I don't want to call it, like, RTS elements, but it kind of does have that. Like, when you're in battle, you got, like, certain elements of strategy, because obviously you're playing as Star-Lord, and you can, like, command some of your teammates between, like, combining different moves, pulling off different combos and attacks, different styles of attacks, and you as Star-Lord, like, you have different ways to attack. You can use your guns, you can go melee, and it's honestly a really satisfying and engaging combat loop. And then after you're fighting for a bit, you and your squad can like pull off like this super special move. There's a lot that I want to say about this game, but considering the fact that this game is so story driven and even like the gameplay elements tie in so heavily to the story, there's not a whole lot I can say about it besides the fact that if Avengers left you a little sore, you know, if it left you kind of doubting Square Enix and Marvel games, don't let that deter you from playing Guardians of the Galaxy, because this game is truthfully a masterpiece. The story is nothing short of amazing, the gameplay is amazing, the dialogue is amazing, the characters are amazing. Like, this game is just, they absolutely nailed it. And plus, can we just like take a minute to admire this cover art together? Like, this cover art is genuinely beautiful. So please, even if you're a little sore after Avengers and you're not so sure, please just give this one a chance. I promise it's different. I honestly really have the urge to replay this one. I beat it back in the 2021. Like, shortly after it launched, I kind of just like sat down, got through it in like, it was like 2 days, I think. That was almost like 2 years ago at this point. So, man, I don't know. I'm thinking about diving back in. Yeah, I don't dive in that soon for most games, but hey, if that doesn't tell you how special this game is, then I don't know what will. Oh, and that soundtrack? Beautiful. Anyway, yeah, last time I kind of dragged things out for a little too long, if I'm going to be honest, and I kind of almost went into spoiler territory with some of my things. So in this video, I try to be a bit more vague, tell you just enough about the game and show off like trailers of the game without going too in depth or possibly ruining anything or just, you know, dragging the video out for too long. So these are 5 underrated PS4 games. Again, these aren't like the 5 most underrated PS4 games. These are just 5 underrated games. So, you know, if you guys want to follow up to this video, just let me know. If you want to follow up on a different console, let me know. All of these games go for relatively cheap. None of them are necessarily too expensive. Guardians of the Galaxy is the only one where I feel like it probably definitely would have like held up in its value over time. I don't think you'll be picking that one up for like 10 bucks on eBay, but for all the other ones, yeah, you could probably pick them up for about 10 to 15 tops. Anyway, yeah, after watching this video, are you planning to pick up any of these games or check any of them out? Have you played any of these games? Do you agree that these are underrated? Whatever it is, whatever you're thinking, I'd definitely love to hear from you guys. Hey, what's going on, guys? And before we get into this, I just wanted to let you guys know that this is the first official video with the new camera. I know that this camera isn't as good as the old one. However, if you missed the video a couple days ago that I made talking about why I have to use this new camera, let's just say that my old phone isn't even in one piece anymore. That being said, we make do with what we got, and I hope this new camera still looks at least like decent enough to watch. I'm also sorry if I'm slightly out of frame. I had like a whole thing with my old phone, like I had a whole setup. I knew how to be exactly in frame, but with this one, I'm still trying to figure it out, so bear with me. But anyways, enough blabbering. Let's go ahead and talk about 5 hidden gems on the PlayStation 3. Now, you see, normally when I make these videos, I call the video something along the lines of like 5 underrated games on the PS4 that deserve more love or something like that, but I decided I wanted to kind of rename the series and start calling these videos hidden gem videos, because honestly, that's what I view most of these games as, are just hidden gems. And there's definitely a few games in this pile where it might be a little confusing because they're from some pretty well-known series. However, just because a series is well-known doesn't mean that a specific game from a series gets as much love as I feel like it deserves. Anyway, that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the first hidden gem here that we have, which was actually the inspiration for me to make this video, and that is Army of Two. Now, you see, back in the day when Army of Two first launched, I played it, I loved it, and, you know, I went on to play the other games like Army of Two, The 40th Day, and Army of Two, The Devil's Cartel. However, as time has gone on, I've realized nobody ever talks about the Army of Two games, and in fact, I went back and I replayed it the other day. I literally beat it in one afternoon, and I just sat down, cleared it out in one sitting. It's not a terribly long game. It's somewhere between like 4 to 5 hours. I believe my latest playthrough took about like 4.5 hours. But anyways, you know, when I played it back in the day, obviously I loved it. I thought it was a great game, but as I went back to replay it now, I realized just how ahead of its time it was in a couple of aspects, specifically the main claim to fame of this game, that being the whole aggro mechanic. Basically, let me go ahead and just kind of like lay down the premise of the game so you can kind of get like a feel for what the game is about. As the title would suggest, you are an army of two. You have your main characters, Rios and Salem, and you two are an army of two. You work for this private military company called the SSC. You're tasked with a bunch of missions throughout the campaign where you go out, you do these contracts, you get paid. But considering the fact that it's basically just you and one other dude going up against literal hundreds of soldiers,
characters, the game relies heavily on this mechanic called aggro, where basically you two have to balance who is taking aggro at one point. So basically, to explain it in the simplest terms, the more that you shoot, the more that the enemies will be aggroed onto you, and the more that your partner shoots, the more that the enemies will be aggroed onto them. And that may seem like a very simple concept and one that has been in some other games, but trust me, once you play the game and once you experience it for yourself, you will realize just how important it is to this game and how well it was developed. In fact, it's such a big part of the game that there is a meter on your screen at all times. It's not a big meter, it doesn't get in the way at all. In fact, it's very important to the game. Like, it's a good thing that the meter is there, but it's at the top of your screen. It just shows like who the aggro is leading more towards at that current point in time. And the more that the aggro is on your partner, the more that you're almost like invisible to the enemies because they're so focused on your partner, and you're able to kind of like go around the enemy, sneak around them, pick them off one by one as they're focused on your partner. And again, it may seem like kind of gimmicky or it may sound kind of simple as I'm explaining it, but trust me, as soon as you play the game and as soon as you play through the game, you start to realize just how genius the idea is, and the fact that like the levels themselves, it isn't just like a generic cover shooter that you would come to expect from this generation. No, this isn't like a Gears of War clone or anything like that. This is a game that was developed around this aggro mechanic, and you start to see like genuine genius designs, especially in some of the enemy types. You'll have these enemies that are, have like flamethrowers and Gatling guns, and they have all this armor on the front, and you're like, well, how am I supposed to defeat them? So then your partner has to draw aggro so you can sneak around the environment, pick off some of the enemies as you go, but you can't shoot too much because if too much aggro gets on you, then you have to repeat the whole process. It's this whole balancing act. How much do you shoot? Who are you going to pick off? And then you work your way around the enemy, pick off the Gatling gun guy. I won't say too much more because I don't want to delve into spoiler territory, but this is a great game, and the story, it's not like the deepest thing in the world. It's not like a Last of Us by any means. That being said, the story in this game is still really good. You got some military type stuff in there, and then you also have some conspiracy theory type stuff going on in there. It's a fantastic game. It's on Game Pass, and you can pick up a copy on eBay for no more than like $6 or $8. I highly recommend this one. Oh, and it's also on PC, and it goes on sale quite often, so definitely give this one a shot. And for our next game, this is a PlayStation 3 exclusive. This actually came out relatively early in the PlayStation 3's life cycle. In fact, it came out before trophies were even a thing, but that is Heavenly Sword. This one, I definitely can't talk about this one for as long or go as in depth with this one as I did on Army of Two, because there's a lot of story in this game, and I really don't want to spoil any of these games for you guys. So basically, to explain it the best that I can, to keep things as simple as I can, I don't want to be reductive when I say this, but this is kind of like a God of War, Devil May Cry type clone. You have like different combos you can carry out, the hack and slash combat. But the thing that sets this game apart is, not only the combat, because you have these different stances you can do, different ranged abilities, different, close quarters abilities, then you have like your strength stance. The thing that really sets this game apart from other God of War / Devil May Cry / like Dante Inferno type games is honestly like the charisma and the personality of all of the characters. This is one of those games where I actually found myself enjoying the times that the villains were on screen. I enjoyed every single second that any of the bad guys or the villains in this game were on screen. Between their dialogue, their character designs, and just like the art direction and the script for this game is just, I love it. King Bohan is genuinely one of my favorite villains in gaming just because of his personality and the way that he delivers his lines. I'm sorry that I can't say much more about this, but there is a lot of story here, and beyond the game, like, it's hard to talk about the gameplay because I don't want to spoil the surprises that the game has in store for you later on. But yeah, definitely worth picking this one up. I believe I got this copy for like maybe $15-ish. It's definitely not like as cheap as something like, say, Army of Two, but if you go on eBay, you could easily find a copy for less than $20, probably somewhere between like 10 to 20, somewhere in that range. Next up, this is a series that definitely deserves way more love. That is Dynasty Warriors 6. Now, this goes for any Dynasty Warriors game, really, whether it's, the original ones, or even the spin-off games like Hyrule Warriors, for example, which, amazing game, by the way. Now, there are stories in these games, but, when you're playing these games, it's definitely mainly for the gameplay, or at least that's what you're going to be spending a lot of your time doing. If I could define this game into a genre, it would be hack and slash meets RTS, but put an emphasis on real time, because normally with RTS games, you probably immediately think of those like old school PC games or whatever, but no, when I say real time, I mean we're talking like third-person action game type of real-time. Like, you're in the moment, and you're basically like a one-man army against thousands of enemies. And I'm not kidding when I say thousands. Like, by the time that you finish a round in this game or a level in this game, you're looking at somewhere between 1,000 to 3,000 kills. You're just hacking, you're slashing, you're sending bodies all over the place. And surprisingly, this game is rated T, but, there's not like any crazy gore in this game. Like, you're not chopping off arms and heads and stuff like that. Like, it's literally just their bodies, like, flying all over the place. But yeah, basically, like I said, it's just you're a one-man army against thousands thousands of enemies, you're running around, you're capturing outposts, you're defending your outposts, you're making like these split-second decisions where it's like, okay, am I going to go to this outpost now? Do I need to go capture this outpost now? If I capture this outpost, will this be more advantageous for me now? Or should I go capture this? Should I defend this? Okay, there's a big enemy or a big horde of enemies coming here. Should I clear those out, or do I have enough time to do this other thing? Do I use this ability now? Do I save it for a later time? Like, it may sound a little stressful as I'm explaining it, but trust me, once you play the game, you get into this like indescribable flow state where it feels really natural as you're playing it. And honestly, if you have like a Wii U or a Nintendo Switch, I highly recommend picking up Hyrule Warriors. That game is absolutely phenomenal. It's essentially Zelda meets Dynasty Warriors, and man, that game is so underrated. That game is so good. I can't even describe it. Playing as Link and just pulling off all the combos that he has access to in that game. Like, if you're a Zelda fan, it's worth experiencing. If you're a Dynasty Warriors fan, it's worth experiencing. So definitely go play Hyrule Warriors, but if you don't have a Nintendo system and you just have like a PlayStation or an Xbox or whatever, definitely at least pick up Dynasty Warriors, because these games are amazing. Next up, this one will definitely be a little controversial because it is from a rather famous series. In fact, it is so famous that it has one of the most famous gaming memes of all time, like, tied to it, that being, can it run Crysis? Now, the one that I wanted to highlight today is Crysis 2, and you may be wondering, like, why are you talking about Crysis? Everybody knows about Crysis, but the thing is, everybody knows about Crysis. Crysis 1. Nobody, and I do mean, like, nobody that I've talked to, maybe I'm just talking to the wrong people, nobody mentions Crysis 2 or 3, barely anybody has played Crysis 3. I've met a few folks that have played Crysis 2, but most people haven't even touched the third one. So really, this is kind of like a 2-in-1, either Crysis 2 or Crysis 3, though if I was to recommend one or a certain order, I would say play Crysis 2 and then play Crysis 3, because there's a few references in 3 that call back to Crysis 2. I would recommend playing all 3 of them, if I'm going to be honest. However, at this point, I'm sure everybody has played Crysis 1 at least once. Also worth mentioning is that all 3 of these games are on Xbox Game Pass, so you can play them that way. But basically, the main reason, outside of like maybe a few story things, that I would recommend playing the second one before the third one is because while the first one is a great game, 2 and 3 are kind of like their own thing. Like, 2 and 3 feel like a duology, whereas Crysis 1 kind of feels like a thing over here that was a bit more experimental, if that makes any sense. Like, all 3 of them still do feel like a nice conjoined trilogy. However, 2 and 3 definitely have a different direction that they took, and they both feel very similar. And if you played Crysis 2 before 3, I feel like it would make you appreciate the changes and, you know, certain things that they did in 3 just a bit more if you play 2 first. But the main premise of Crysis 2 is that, you know, the aliens are invading again, and this time they are invading New York. And, you know, the game starts out, you see New York, it's real sunny, it's New York as it always is, as it always should be, and then you see the aliens come in, and one of my favorite parts of this game is how you get to watch New York fall. You get to see it go from this beautiful city that it is to just an absolute wasteland. And it's not like one of those things where it's like, aliens aren't here, everything looks great, and then the aliens come and it's just immediately destroyed. No, you watch the city fall, like, slowly and slowly. It gets more corrupted, more things get damaged, you watch literal, like, skyscrapers come down. I remember when Crysis 2 first launched back in the day, and obviously I was playing it on my console, and I was like, how is, like, my Xbox 360, like, even running this right now? And then when I revisited this game last year on PS3, I had the same thoughts, just like, how is my console even running this right now? This is insane, because not only are the effects the same, but, like, you know, obviously the Crysis games are kind of known on console for not always having the best performance. I mean, like, they're playable, but, you know, sometimes the frame rates do get a little low. Personally, low frame rates don't bother me. You know, I grew up with, like, PS2 and PS1 games and stuff like that. So, you know, GoldenEye 64, you throw C4 and immediately everything's running at 5 FPS. So, yeah, needless to say, I can play a game through at, like, 15 FPS, and it honestly would never bother me. I just like fun games. That being said, Crysis 2 and 3, both on PS3 and Xbox 360, you know, despite how insane, like, the games honestly look like PS4, Xbox One titles, maybe even beyond that. I mean, there are certain screenshots in, like, Crysis 2 and Crysis 3 where it's like, oh my, like, that looks like a modern game. Yet despite that, it still runs incredibly well. It maintains a pretty solid frame rate for the most part. Yeah, all in all the Crysis games, all 3 of them are fantastic. I highly recommend any of them, but, you know, I rarely ever hear people talk about, like, 2 and 3 anymore, so I figured I'd mention it in this video. And for our last game, this one one's definitely going to be a little divisive because there's literally an entire genre named after these games. So you may be wondering why I'm including it, but that is Demon's Souls. Now, again, you may be wondering, like, why are you even talking about Demon's Souls? You know, it has the PS5 remake, more people know about it, but the thing is, before the PS5 remake even came out, some people thought that Dark Souls was the first Souls game. There were so many people that didn't even know that there was a Souls game before Dark Souls, that being Demon's Souls. And you also may be wondering, like, why would you recommend the PS3 version if the PS5 version exists? And that is because there's something about the PS5 version, it doesn't work for me the same way that the PlayStation 3 version does. There's something about the PS5 version, it feels more like generic castle RPG. Music feels out of place in certain places. The graphics don't exactly all blend together the way that they should. You know, the art direction is a little off in some spots, or some things were changed that really shouldn't have been. And I know that may seem rather nitpicky, but for me personally, it's just whenever I've played the Demon's Souls remake or whenever I watch gameplay of it, it's just something feels disconnected, and it doesn't really feel true to itself in the same way that the original version of the game does on PlayStation 3. The original version feels like one complete cohesive experience. Everything complements each other. The music complements the graphics, the art direction complements the music, the gameplay just complements everything else. Like, it all just works together so well. And while the PS5 remake is great, there's just something about it where I didn't feel immediately immersed and connected to that world on PS5. I didn't have that urge to keep playing. If anything, I kind of had the urge to stop playing. It's just, there's something about it. It's similar to the Halo Anniversary. Like, I can't play the Halo Anniversary edition. Whenever I play it, it's just something in my brain. It wants to stop playing. Like, the feels are off, the vibes are off. It's just like, I don't know, something about it just feels out of focus. Like, I don't know, there's just something about it. It like, something about it just doesn't mesh right, whether it's the music not really meshing well with the graphics, or the graphics not really meshing well with the music. And yeah, same thing with the Demon's Souls remake. It's just, I don't know. And I know for a fact I'm not the only one, because after I played it, I went and searched up on like Reddit threads and YouTube just to see if I was the only one. And no, there was literally like tons of video essays and threads on Reddit talking about that exact same thing. So I'm glad I'm not alone. But yeah, if you are to play Demon's Souls, I would highly recommend going for the PS3 version. This is the definitive version of Demon's Souls. Now, if you only have a PS5, yeah, play the Demon's Souls remake. It's still a great remake of the game, and it's still absolutely phenomenal. Of course, it's Demon's Souls. That being said, if you do have the option, I would highly recommend going for that PS3 original. It's not too expensive nowadays, and it's definitely worth the purchase. Oh, and can we also get a shout out to the Maiden in Black track from the Demon's Souls soundtrack? That is just, that track is amazing. But anyways, these are 5 hidden gems for the PlayStation 3, so now I definitely want to hear from you guys down below. Have you played these games before? Do you plan to play them after watching this video? And also let me know if you want more videos like this. Obviously, I've made a couple videos similar to this for the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 2, and obviously these, you know, if you know anything about the PlayStation 3, these obviously aren't the only 5 hidden gems. Like, I could make I can make an entire series just on the PS3 alone. So if you want more videos specifically on the PS3, or maybe on another system like the Wii U or the Xbox One or the Xbox 360 or the original Xbox, literally any console, just let me know and I would totally be down to do it. I love making videos like this. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's been a while since I made a video like this where I just kind of sit down, talk with you guys. And I honestly really make missing videos like this. We used to talk about like hidden gems on the original Xbox, on the PS2, well, really just any console in general, and just, you know, game recommendations. So today I decided that we bring those types of videos back, and today I decided that we talk about 5 indie games that you should play but probably haven't, or whatever I end up titling this video. Let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. The first indie game that I'm going to recommend is A Short Hike. This indie game is absolutely amazing, and I believe that it's also still available on Game Pass, but even if not, it goes on sale all the time, and it's on literally every console under the sun, including like the Nintendo Switch, the Xbox One, the PS4, etc. The game is exactly what the title says. It's a short hike. So basically, the premise of the game is pretty simple. You're playing as this cute little bird, and you're just trying to make it to the top of this mountain so then you have enough reception to make a phone call home. However, as basic of a task as that may seem, the entire game is basically your journey up to the top of the mountain. The game isn't too long. You can beat it within like, what, 2.5 hours tops probably on your first playthrough, and it's one of those things where it's almost like a lesson for life. Sometimes it's not about the destination. It's sort of like the road trip type thing, right? Where it's like, it's less about the destination, where as nice as the destination may be, and as much as that may be your end goal, it really is all about your journey and the things and the people that you encounter along the way. And it's such an amazing, beautiful game. I don't want to say too much about it because there's so many little things that you experience throughout this game, so many people you interact with, so many like small little interactions, and to say anything about this game would honestly honestly be to spoil it. So please, if you have Game Pass, I think it's still on Game Pass, but even if it's not, it goes on sale all the time. I highly recommend it. Next up, we have a game called Omnos. So this is essentially sort of like your Journey type games. You know what I mean? Where it's a silent game. There's no dialogue. There's nothing like that, but there's text all throughout the game. With every new level and section of the world that you go to, you're picking up on more and more pieces of lore. You're like kind of connecting the dots, piecing the story together. It's never hand-fisted to you. Like, you're never outright told anything about the story. Again, there's no dialogue in the game. There's very few cutscenes, and for what cutscenes there are, they're all happening in real time just to like take you from one location to the next. But this game is absolutely gorgeous. Even if you don't care about the lore, even if you don't care about the story, that's okay, because the interactions that you and your little like sidekick have in the game is just, oh, it's so adorable, especially by the end of the game. It's one of those things where, again, I'm not going to spoil it, but the ending literally took me up. I cried when I got to the ending for the first time. Another amazing thing about this game, and I love this in games, is you can interact with as much of the game as you want to or as little as you want to. If you want to, you can literally blast through this game in like 2.5, 3 hours tops, just go through, get through the levels, that's that, and you would still have an enjoyable time, or you can go through and collect everything. And even if you choose to do that, collect everything, do all the puzzles, it might only add like maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours tops onto your playthrough, but even when you're going for everything, it never becomes tedious. Like, it's still so much fun solving all these puzzles, getting all these collectibles. The soundtrack is absolutely superb. It is beautiful. The art style is beautiful. The traversal throughout the world, like the gadgets that you have and the different ways that you can traverse and the different skills you unlock by the end of the game, it's so fluid. There's just something about the graphics, again, in this game, between the graphics and the art style. There's something about the way that the reflections and the lighting works and the light rays from the sky. Oh, it's beautiful. The next game I want to talk about is a game called Lake. So this one is, I feel like this goes for really all the games on this list, but the less said about it, the better. But basically, to give you the premise, the game takes place in the 1980s when computers were first getting big, and you're playing as this girl named Meredith. And she has an office job. You know, she's kind of tired of her job, the same day-to-day life, so she takes a vacation to her hometown, which she hasn't visited in 22 years. It is called Providence Oaks. And basically, during those 2 weeks, her parents are going on vacation, and her father is the mailman for this little town. So while you're going on vacation at the same time that your parents are going on vacation. I'm sorry, I'm doing a terrible job explaining this, but anyway, so while you're going on your vacation to your hometown, you're also picking up your father's job, since he is also going away as mailman for this small town. And basically, you play through the 14-day vacation that Meredith takes, and it's basically, it doesn't say outright that it's USPS, but it's obvious that it's USPS, so, you know, you have off Sundays. So there's 2 Sundays in the game that you get to play through, which really cool things happen during there depending on the decisions that you make during the game and what, like, dialogue choices you make. And it's not one of those games where there's necessarily a bad ending in the game. It's just more or less, what ending will you get? What will you interact with? There's never really any consequences or anything too bad that happens from not interacting with one thing or another, or choosing one dialogue thing or another. It's very similar to Omno, where it's like, how much do you want to engage with? You can engage with as little as you want or as much as you want. And when I played this game, I interacted with literally like everything that I could. I did everything that I could. I accepted all of the opportunities that I could in the game. Again, it's a very simple premise. You spend the entirety of the game just driving around delivering mail, but in between delivering mail, that's where you can pick up like different side quests to do with different people, whether that be watching a movie with the one teenager because her parents wouldn't allow her to watch said movie, or whether it's watching somebody's cats for a couple of hours in the evening while they go get their hair done. There's lots of small side quests like that throughout the game that you can pick up on as, you know, you're delivering mail and interacting with all the people in the small town. And, you know, it may sound very basic and possibly even boring on paper, but I promise, as soon as you pick it up and you play it, it'll all click. It's one of those slice of life games. It's real chill. When I played this game, it was one of those games where it was in the right place at the right time, and by right place, I mean on my hard drive, and at right time, I mean I was just, you know, I was honestly just really anxious, really stressed out, just needed something to help me decompress. And this game was perfect for that. It's an amazing game. I highly recommend it. It's available on PS Plus Extra right now, so if you have that subscription service, you can go download it there. Otherwise, it's another one where I've seen it on sale a couple of times, so it might be worth waiting for a sale, but it's a great game. The 4th game that I'm going to recommend is Midnight Fight Express. This was available on Game Pass day 1, and now it is available over on PlayStation Plus Extra, but man, This game is amazing. It's like John Wick Simulator, basically. You have all these crazy combos you can do with the game. You're able to pick up all these different weapons in the game. Like, basically, the environment is your weapon. You see a chair, you can kick it at your enemy, or you can pick it up and throw it at their face. Oh, you see the bottle on the floor, smash it over his head, do a quick roll to the other guy, disarm him, kick him in the face, shoot him in the face with his own gun, take his gun, shoot everybody else in the room. Oh, you want to take that guy and throw him off the roof? You can do that. You want to suplex him and snap his neck on the ground? You can do that. There is a story here, and you can focus on it if you want, or you can focus on the gameplay. Again, it's one of those games where you can interact with the story, or you cannot. You want to blast through it in a couple of hours? Sure. You want to interact with everything and go back and replay the levels at 100% every level and complete all the challenges? You can do that as well. One thing I will say, though, is the story of this game gets a little crazy. I wasn't expecting some of the twists and turns that happened towards the end, but it was worth engaging with the story. It was so good. I am literally praying that we either see a sequel or like a spiritual successor to this. It's such a good game. And even if it is just a one-off game, that's okay, because I'm a firm believer in that not every game needs to become a franchise, not every game needs a sequel, not every game even needs like a spiritual successor or a reboot. Even if this is just a one-off game, even then I'd be completely okay with it. But that being said, if the devs would ever want to make like a game in this fashion again, I'm there for it. And this is definitely one of those games where if you normally turn off like the vibration on your controller, I recommend leaving the vibration on, because it's one of those things where it's not there too much to where it's annoying, but it actually does benefit the feedback loop in the game. Like when you're shooting and the vibration, like it's not a hardcore vibration like in some games how it literally makes your hands numb after a while. Like it's a very soft vibration. But it works, trust me. And then the last game that I want to talk about today is Trek to Yomi. And fun fact, this was actually my game of the year for 2022. This game is just... oh, it's so good. Where do I begin with Trek to Yomi? This is a Souls-like, Sekiro-like, 2D action linear story game. It's just, oh my, I don't even know how to describe it. So it's sort of like a Souls-like / Sekiro-like in its combat. You know, it's very deliberate. It's very timing-based. You gotta find your windows. Sometimes you're gonna have to parry or deflect like you would in Sekiro. On a first playthrough, it is tough as nails. Like if you've never touched a Souls game before, yeah, you're probably gonna struggle with this one. But if you have some experience with Souls games or like Sekiro or other games similar in the past, you'll probably get by just fine. I know for me personally, the difficulty was like just right. It was never too tough to where it felt like BS. It was just fine-tuned to that perfect extent where I was like, yes, this works. This is it. This is perfect. There are so many things I can compliment about this game. So let's go ahead and just break it down piece by piece without spoiling anything, because there is a lot of story in this. I mean, the game is mainly gameplay focused, but there is a very engaging story to be found here. So first off, the first obvious thing that you can see on your screen right now, the graphics and the art style, it's based off of those like old school, you know, like Japanese samurai movies. And I am a sucker for movies like that, let me just say that. So as soon as I turned the game on for the first time, I knew immediately what they were going for. It clicked for me immediately. It's a gorgeous game. It is very cinematic, and by cinematic, I don't mean cinematic in the typical normal sense, you know, modern day. Every time somebody says cinematic, you think, oh, okay, you know, they do everything in their power to make the game feel very linear, you know, a lot of set pieces, a quick time event. No, not cinematic like that. I just mean like the camera angles and the way that they made the game look. Like it's a very cinematic looking game, but you're in control the entire time. Cinematic never interferes with the gameplay. It's entirely gameplay focused. It's just they make it look as cinematic as possible while doing that, and it works. Everything in the sound department is literally perfect. Music, sound effects, sound design, the way that you can hear like the swords clashing every time that you parry, and the way that the music ends up lining up with the combat almost perfectly, even though it's not a rhythm game. Somehow the music just always works perfectly with the combat and the flow and like the beats per minute of the combat. And you hear the rain hitting the floor and the swords clashing and the echoes and like, you know, when the buildings that you're fighting in, it's just, oh, it works so beautifully. And again, the combat, I mean, that kind of ties in with the difficulty. Like it's so fine-tuned. It's literally perfect. Like if it was any harder, it would be too hard. If it was any easier, it would be too easy. It's literally perfect where it's at right now. And the gameplay, you know, it's never clunky. It's never frustrating. It's deliberate, but it's not too punishing. Like I'm trying to think of a way. Think of it like a Souls-like, right? Like it's deliberate. When you hit the buttons, you have to make them count. If you're gonna parry, you are, you know, you're locked into that parry. Every time you slash your enemy, you're committing to that slash. It was on Game Pass a while ago, but I don't think it's on there anymore. It was added to the PS Plus Extra tier a little while ago, so I would recommend picking it up there if you have a PS4. Otherwise, either wait for a sale or pick it up full price. It's such an amazing game, worth every penny. And like I said, it was literally my game of the year for 2022. Like, it was that good. But anyway, that was 5 indie games that everyone should play, but you probably have something, whatever I ended up titling this video. I apologize, I know this video is a bit scatterbrained. I think next time I'm gonna write down some notes before I make this video, because yeah, I can even feel it right now. Like, my brain is all over the place. Like, I went into it thinking I knew what I wanted to say about each game, but it's just, there's so many things that I can compliment about these games. Like, my brain was just going all over the place because I didn't want to drag this video out, and I also didn't want to spoil anything about the games, but there's just, oh, there's so many compliments, so many great things I can say about all 5 of the games that I talked about here, and so many more. So if you want to follow up to this video, just let me know. Next time, I'll write down some notes or maybe even like a little mini script just to kind of help me stay on course, because I know I was really scatterbrained here. Now, I'd definitely love to hear from you guys. What are some indie games that you guys love? Also, let me know if you played any of the games on this list, but whatever it is, whatever you're thinking, I'd definitely love to hear from you guys. You guys seem to really enjoy the last video that I did like this, so I figured I'd go ahead and make another one. This is 5 more indie games you should, God, I honestly, I can't even remember what I called the last video, but it's 5 more indie games you should play, but probably haven't. I think that's what I'm gonna call it. Anyway, the first game I got for you guys today is called Family Man. So, right off the rip, you're probably seeing the gameplay and you're like, what is this? Like a Minecraft type of game? And honestly, it's not Minecraft-like, okay? You're not gonna be like building and crafting or anything like that, but it has a very similar art style. It has like that Minecraft-y voxel art style, but anyway, the premise of this game is it's basically like a time management sim. So the name of the game kind of plays into it. You're like a family man, you know, you're a dad, you have a family to look after, but let's just say, you know, I don't want to spoil too much, but let's just say you and a buddy of yours gets drug into a very messy situation that you have to try to clean up. Long story short, it all revolves around money and how you acquire that money and how you pay off your dues. Are you gonna play it straight? Are you gonna stick to the legal path? Are you gonna take the illegal path and do some dirty work? And on top of carrying out these tasks, you also have to make sure that you stop by the house sometimes, you know, clean up some dishes, clean up the house, hang out with your family, make enough time for them. And it's all about time because you have to do this within the span of a day. So like the game takes place over the course of like 2 weeks. But by the end of each day, you have to pay off a certain amount of money to the mob, which is why it's really important that you balance, okay, when am I going to do what tasks? And you also have to make sure that you stop by the house because you have to maintain your family's happiness, otherwise your family will leave you. It may sound daunting, it may sound stressful, but trust me, like, once you're playing the game, it actually works. Like, it's weird. It's not ever necessarily stressful. It's just you get into this flow of, okay, I need to go here, I need to do this, I need to go over here, I need to do this task, I need to do this job, I need to pay this off real quick, and then go do this. There's also a lot of side quests in the game, which also kind of feed into the amount of money you can be paid. And you also don't have to just play it straight the entire time. If you want to get your hands dirty, you can, but let's just say there's gonna be some consequences for it. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil too much about the game, but yeah, it's an absolute treat of a game to play through. You can easily beat it in a day. It's on literally every console under the sun, Xbox, PlayStation, Switch, PC. It goes on sale pretty often, and yeah, it's worth every penny. It's a lot of fun. Next game that I got for you guys is Gunfire Reborn. Now, I know this one is a bit more of a popular indie game, so like, you know, more people have at least heard of it, but surprisingly, there's still a lot of people that haven't played it. So to some people, this might be cheating because it is a bit more popular, but that being said, it is still an indie game, so it still counts, and I want more people to play it because it's still very underrated. Basically, think like Borderlands meets roguelite. Like, it's very hard to describe exactly what this game is because there's so many elements at play, but if I could explain it in the simplest terms, that's what it would be like. Borderlands meets like roguelite, like Risk of Rain 2. There's not much to explain here. I mean, it's your typical roguelite, you know, you go through the game and because it is a roguelite, not a roguelike, so that means that once you die, you know, you're still making progression in every death. Like every time that you die, you're able to level up, you're able to like start out with better gear, for example. As the game goes on, you'll gradually be leveling up your character, and then once you beat the game on like the normal difficulty, then there's another difficulty that unlocks that like opens up like more levels and possibilities and such for you. I don't play a ton of roguelites. Like, I enjoy roguelites. It's just one of those things where I don't play too many of them too often, but when I do, you know, I'm very picky. Like, if I'm gonna play a roguelite, I want to make sure it's not gonna waste my time, and Gunfire Reborn is definitely one of those where it does not waste your time. Like, it's worth every second, and that the feedback loop in the gameplay just feels so good. Like when you're picking off the shots, just that feedback when you're getting those headshots. There's something about like the sound design and the graphics. I love the graphics in this game. Again, it's one of those things where I don't exactly know how to describe it. It's like, it's kind of low poly, but I really like the look. The characters are also really cool. You play as like these animals in the game. I went with the cat most of the time. I can't even remember what the cat's name was. It's like the starter character, but I honestly found that his abilities were just so good. There's some other characters that I ended up experimenting it with like throughout the game, and I also ended up like going back a little bit later on just to try out all the different characters, see who I preferred, but honestly, just more times than not, I stuck with the cat. That'll obviously come down to preference and play style and such though. Regardless, no matter how you choose to play, the only wrong way to play this game is by not playing it at all. It was on Game Pass a while ago. I don't know if it's still there, but regardless, it's another game where it's on a lot of consoles. I don't know if it's on the Switch, but I know for a fact it's on Xbox and PC. Whether it's on sale or whether it's not, it's worth every penny. It is such a fun game. I cannot recommend it enough. Next up, we have another game where I can't say too much about it, but I at least wanted to put it on your guys' radar, and that is Signalis. So Signalis is a throwback to the old school, like, days of survival horror on, like, the PS1, like OG Resident Evil, Silent Hill. It is... I don't know how a game this good in this style exists today, and it's like a new IP, but it does, and I am so glad that it does. If you like Resident Evil, like old school Resident Evil, or if you've ever even been slightly interested in these kinds of games, this game will be for you. It literally just brings those classic gameplay tropes into the modern era, and it does it flawlessly, while being unique and innovative enough and putting its own spin on things, and it's really hard to like describe this game and talk about it without spoiling it. It's one of those things where you need to play it. The art style isn't necessarily a callback to the old school kind of like survival horror games though, because there have been like I saw a couple indie games coming out recently where like they try to do the throwback to those PS1 era graphics. It isn't necessarily like that. It kind of does its own thing. It's more like that pixelated art style. One thing I really want to compliment about this game though is the sound design and the atmosphere. Like when you're walking through the halls and you just, you hear those creaking noises or the echoes of your shots, and then and furthermore, when it comes to like the atmosphere and the tension of like, managing your resources in this game and like, okay, do I need to use this now? Do I save this for later? Like this game nails that perfectly. That is one of the defining features of survival horror in my opinion, is like inventory management and resource management and like, looking around, exploration, like, finding more ammo, finding more keys, finding whatever you need. And this game does that perfectly. Another thing that this game does really well, see, in most games, it depends on the game, right? Like if it's like a survival horror game, I'm more likely to, stop and read notes and such. But, it really depends on the game if I'm actually going to stop and read stuff. This game, I actually wanted to read stuff. When you're like picking up these notes and you're reading these things, you're reading things on the wall, it's like you start to slowly piece things together with this story. It's just, and like towards the end, if you've been reading all the notes, picking stuff up, it all just comes together, and it's just the lore and the story is so good. This is another one that I've seen on Game Pass a while ago, but otherwise, again, I know I say this all the time, but literally, it's worth the money. If you got the money to put down, like, I can't recommend it enough. I mean, if there's ever a time where, like, a game is good, but I couldn't recommend it at full price, I would clarify that, and I'd be like, hey, if it's on sale, grab it then. But no, this is another one where, like, it doesn't matter. If you have the disposable income, why not support the developers? You know what I mean? Like, it is such a good game. Next up, we have 2 games. I know this is kind of cheating. This is technically like 6 indie games, but it is what it is. I couldn't pick one. So first off, they're both kind of similar, but they're kind of different. So the first one is a throwback to the Nintendo 64 era of platformers, and that is Super Kiwi 64. This is a very short game. You can beat it easily in a sitting. But it's really as simple as I described it. It is a throwback to the Nintendo 64 era of platformers. Think like Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, etc. You could really feel like the Banjo-Kazooie influence, at least I could when I was playing it, just something about the art style and such. But, it's just a 3D collectathon. It's a lot of fun. And then the other one I wanted to talk about is a game called Lunistus, which is more of a throwback to the PS1 era of platformers. N64 and PS1, sure, they were the same generation, but they had, their platformers were a little bit different the way they executed things. And Lunistus is very much more a PS1 era platformer per se. Again, similar to Super Kiwi 64, it's just a 3D collectathon, except this one is a bit more like action elements. It's a bit more intense. It's a little more difficult. It's not necessarily like, it's not like Crash Bandicoot 1 OG PS1, like difficult by any means, but it's definitely a bit more difficult than Super Kiwi 64. Super Kiwi 64 is more going for that like chill 3D collectathon, just laid back, having a chill, nostalgic play session, whereas Lunistus, it's definitely looking to challenge you just a little bit more. That being said, it's not overly difficult. I didn't really get stuck on anything throughout my playthrough per se. It took a bit more precision and skill, I guess. Again, I couldn't pick between these two, so I figured I'd just recommend both of them because they're both amazing and both of them are on Well, Lunistus I've seen on other consoles, but I don't know about Super Kiwi 64. I only saw that on the eShop, so I don't. It might be on other platforms. It might be on PC. I'm not sure. I played it on the Switch personally, and and by the way, worth mentioning, even when it's not on sale, the Super Kiwi 64 is literally only like $3. And if you don't have $3 to spare, then let me go ahead and throw in just two more indie games into this list while we're at it. Tori 3D and Tori 2 are both 3D platformers on the Nintendo Switch. They're both relatively similar in the way that they play. Again, just 3D platformers, 3D collectathons, and such. They're more platformer games than they are collectathons, though they're kind of both. But both of these are only $1. I'm talking like full price, not even when it's on sale. I don't even think it. I don't know if this game's ever gone on sale. Not like it needs to, because yeah, both of these games, Tori 3D and Tori 2, are literally just $1. Just always on the Nintendo Switch. So again, another one that I highly recommend, especially at that price. Like, it's totally worth it. And then finally, the last game on the list, we have Sinner Sacrifice for Redemption. So this is a game that I played on the Nintendo Switch. I don't know if it's on other consoles. It might be. I didn't check. I'm sorry. I should probably start fact-checking these things before I record these videos. But this is a Souls-like game where you are fighting personified versions of the 7 deadly sins. Now, there's not much to spoil here, because if you know anything about like Souls games and Souls-like games, they're very cryptic, and the story is up to you to decipher through like item descriptions and lore, and reading into things, and figuring out what things are allegories for what. But again, it's kind of easy to figure out what the allegories are, as these are the 7 deadly sins. Now, thankfully, this isn't like some indie Souls-likes where they try way too hard to be like overly difficult and end up becoming unfair. All of the bosses in this game, they feel straight out of a Souls game. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Like, they are perfectly tuned. They aren't too hard. They aren't too easy either. They're perfectly tuned in the Dark Souls sense, where they're difficult, but they're fair. Like, when you die, you know when you're making a mistake. You figure things out rather quickly as to, like, okay, this is how I need to defeat this boss. But again, it's never, like, spoon-fed to you as to how you need to do what. You have an initial tutorial at the beginning that teaches you how to run, how to attack, how to dodge, etc. But then that's it. The rest of the game, it's up to you to decide what bosses have what weaknesses and such. They give you all the tools that you need. Now, granted, this isn't a Souls-like game in terms of the exploration and the progression side of things, because it's pretty simple. It's basically a hub world. Think like the Nexus from Demon Souls, where it's a hub world, and then there's like these 7 like sign statue things or shrines or whatever, and then they'll take you to the boss fight. It's basically like one long boss rush, except it's not that long because it's literally only 7 bosses. So depending on your skill level, you could either beat the game in about an hour, or it could take you like, I don't know, like weeks. There's so many things I could compliment about this game. Again, the difficulty is literally perfectly tuned. The sound design is amazing. The graphics and the aesthetic of this game, it's got that dark, gloomy atmosphere. It's absolutely perfect. The art style is amazing as well. For some reason, it almost gave me like Little Nightmares vibes. It's not exactly like that art style, but it's kind of similar in some of the like more grotesque like bosses and creatures and stuff that you'll fight throughout the game. Again, I don't know if it's on other consoles. I played it personally on the Nintendo Switch, and I bought it when it was on sale. I think it was only like $5 when I got it on sale. I'm not sure what its full price is, but whether it's on sale, whether it's full price, it's another one where I can recommend. This is one where I'd say, considering its length, you might want to wait till it's on sale, because if I don't know what its full price is, but if its full price is like $20, considering the fact that you can beat it in 1 hour, that might deter some people. For me personally, I don't really care about price. For me, it's always, quality over quantity. I'm more than happy paying $70 for a game, even if it's only like 3 hours long as those 3 hours are good. But even then, I'm the type of guy where I always love experiencing new things. So even if I paid like $70 for a game and it's only like 3 hours, but it sucks, I'd still be happy, because I'd be like, hey, that was an experience. Some people might call it low standards. I just like to think that I have an open mind. That's just how I am. I take things at face value and I enjoy them for what they are. But considering that, if you have Souls experience, you might be able to beat it really fast. And if, like, price to quantity of content matters to you, you might want to wait till it's on sale. Just, wait till it's on sale for like $5, maybe pick it up then. Then like $3 for an hour. That seems fair. But I have a feeling it's going to take more like people more than an hour to beat this game. I could see it easily taking somewhere between like 5 to 6, maybe even more hours to beat the game. Because, it is just like a boss rush per se, but there is still like some exploring to do, and there is still a bit of a learning curve to the game. But anyway, that was 5. Technically, well, if you count the extra ones that I included, like 6, 7, like 8 indie games you should check out. But yeah, anyway, if you guys want another video like this, just let me know. I figured I'd make this one because the last one did really well, and I was like, hey, I have a ton of more indie games that I want to talk about, and clearly I couldn't even keep it to just 5 in this video. What can I say? I love my indie games. But again, as always, if you guys have any fun indie games that you've played or you want to recommend other people, down in the comments, feel more than free to do so. And also let me know if any of the games in this video interest you, and if so, do you plan on picking any of them up? Let me know that as well.
You guys seem to always really enjoy when I make videos like this, you know, just kind of want to like sit down, talk about some games that I love, gush about some games that I love. In recent times, any times that we've, you know, made videos like this, it's been about indie games, but today we're actually going to be talking about horror games because not only is it spooky month, but if you guys are watching this on the day that it goes up, it is also Friday the 13th, so happy Friday the 13th if that's something we should really be celebrating. In most places, I'd say it's okay to celebrate that holiday, but I live in Florida, so I gotta be careful. We got a couple indie games on here, a couple lesser known games, and also some big AAA games, so strap in. The first game that I got for you guys today, well, this is gonna be a common theme, right? This isn't necessarily just a top 5 games list, it's kind of like a 5 games, but I cheated, because by the end of it, we're gonna be covering like 20 games. Anyway, the first game is Dead Space, and this kind of applies to the whole trilogy, but I guess more specifically, we'll focus on the Dead Space remake, since that's like the most recent game at the time of me recording this. The Dead Space remake. Where do I even begin with this game? It is a remake of the all-time classic Dead Space. Unfortunately, we do not have confirmation as to if a Dead Space 2 or 3 remake are coming, and obviously if they do end up making a Dead Space 3 remake, that would be rather interesting. I love Dead Space 3. I'm one of the few people that can, you know, honestly, truthfully say that. But if they were to remake that game, it is, I wonder how they'd go about it. If I'm gonna be honest, I think that if they were to remake Dead Space 3, they'd probably take, like, the Resident Evil remake approach, like something like Resident Evil 4, where they take the original game, but then they'd, like, spin it to kind of, like, fall more in line with the more horror-centered tone that they went for in this remake, and, you know, obviously Dead Space 2, even the original one, like, that one also started to lean into the action a bit more, but it was still pretty spooky, so I wonder what they're going to do if they end up remaking those games. Anyway, look at me. We're literally like not even 2 minutes into the video and I'm already blabbering. But yeah, Dead Space Remake, if you haven't played it before, I highly recommend playing that or just the original games, period. Like all of the Dead Space games are absolutely amazing. Next up, this one is going to be a little interesting because, you know, on most of these like Halloween games lists, you'd expect it to all be like horror games, something super scary. But no, I actually want to talk about Costume Quest 1 and 2. If you have not played Costume Quest before, essentially you're playing as these kids that are, you know, going trick-or-treating, except while you're trick-or-treating, let's just say you stumble upon the wrong house and your sister gets stolen, and this is referring to the first game specifically, but you know, your quest is to get your sister back, and you have to fight these goblins, and the costumes that you get to switch between like Halloween costumes, right? And depending on what costume you're wearing, you get like different abilities in battle, different actions, different moves you can pull off, and it's really cool. I don't want to spoil a whole lot because the game itself, the first game specifically, isn't very long. You can beat it in like 4 or 5 hours, so you know, the more I say about it, the more I'd be spoiling. It's one of those games that I highly recommend. Same thing with the second one. The second one's a little bit longer and it expands on the story. I'm not going to talk about the story for the second one just because obviously it's the sequel, so if I talk about that one, it might spoil some things from the first one, but I can highly recommend both of these games, and the gameplay is rather similar between both of them, but they're both absolutely amazing. Next up, I'm cheating. I've been cheating for all of the games so far, and now that I'm looking at my list, yeah, I cheated on all of these, but it's a loose 5 games, you know what I mean? It's like, here's 5 games, but, you know, while I talk about one game, there's probably other games that can probably, like, tie into it or also apply here. And the same is, you know, goes for all of these games, really. But the next one is Bloodborne. And while I'm talking about Bloodborne, I'll just go ahead and say it now. I would also recommend Demon's Souls and Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 2 isn't as spooky, and Dark Souls 3... I don't know, man, like, I guess it could work for Halloween, but that one's just more depressing than anything. Not because the game is bad or anything, but it's just like, you know, when I think about that game, I guess Dark Souls 3 could work for Halloween. Just make sure you have, like, a box of tissues nearby, because, man, Dark Souls 3 can really put you in a mood. Anyway, the main one that I wanted to highlight is Bloodborne, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Bloodborne. Oh, wow, Bloodborne, like, I go to talk about the game, and I literally don't even know what to say about it. We'll just sum it up in a couple of words. Yarnum, saw cleavers, hunters, werewolves, like, do you really need to hear any more? Like, most of the bosses in the game are these, like, giant werewolves and furry beasts and, like, electrical beasts, and there's just, oh, the bosses in this game. The one criticism that I've had for this game in the past is that the bosses can feel a little samey sometimes, but for the bosses that stand out, man, do they stand out. Now, this isn't a spoiler, but like the first boss of the game, for example, or one of the first bosses you can encounter in the game, like Father Gascoigne, oh my gosh, what a spectacular fight. The combat in this game is just, oh, it's one of those things that I could praise for days on end. I absolutely love the combat in this game. It's lightning fast, and there's so many different ways that you can engage with the combat. So, you know, some people tend to criticize this game because there's not as many weapons in it, but then you have to remember the trick weapons in this game and how, like, every weapon in this game is essentially 2 or maybe even 3 different weapons. Not to mention the transform attacks, and there's just, oh, there's so many things at play with this game's combat system. It's so good. You know a game is good when I'm sitting here literally like pulling on my hair, getting overwhelmed, trying to think about what to talk about this game and what not to talk about, because like it's one of those games where like talking about certain things could be considered a spoiler, but on the other hand, it's like there's so many things to talk about that it's just like my brain goes all over the place when I try to. It's an absolutely amazing game, and if you haven't played it before, I highly recommend that you play it this Halloween. And if you have a PlayStation 4 or 5, it is also available through the PlayStation Plus Extra catalog. That's essentially like PlayStation's version of Game Pass or whatever. So yeah, if you have that, I can highly recommend playing it there. And if not, you can pick it up on eBay for like, I don't know, maybe like 10-15 bucks. I got a sealed copy just like a year ago for like 10 bucks. Another game that I wanted to highlight here that kind of falls into the whole Bloodborne thing would be Lies of P. This one's obviously a bit more of a recent release, but it's also available on Game Pass, and man, it is such an amazing game. Just to explain how much I loved this game, the game came out, I sat down and played it, and I beat it in the span of 24 hours. If that doesn't say that I love this game, I don't know what will. I highly recommend Lies of P. Next up, we have The Evil Within 1 and 2. Yes, once again, I'm cheating. Like I said, that goes for all the games, unless I cheated on all of them. But specifically, we'll focus on The Evil Within 1, because while The Evil Within 2 is still spooky, scary, creepy, whatever, it's, I don't know, it relies less on the horror, I guess. Like, that game feels more of, like, a survival action, you know, like, it relies more on, like, the survival aspects more than the horror aspect. Like, there's still plenty of horror aspect. Like, there's still plenty of moments in the game where, like, I was, like, jumping out of my skin, like, oh my god, that was terrifying. But especially with the first game. Like, the first game really leans into the like, survival horror roots. So, if I could describe The Evil Within, if you haven't played it before, which if you haven't played it before, oh my gosh, you were severely missing out. It is such a good game. Don't listen to the critics. There's so many critics and, like, critical gamers out there like, oh, Evil Within wasn't that good. No, The Evil Within was an absolute masterpiece. The best way that I can describe it is Resident Evil 4, if it relied more on, like, the gore and the horror elements. Like, there were so many, like, horror elements here, but also like psychological horror, and it's just, it is such an amazing game. It'll mess with your mind. Even to this day, when I go back and replay this game, because, you know, I've been playing this game ever since the first game. I remember, like, leading up to that game's release, I was so excited for it, and then I got it on launch day, and it's one of those games where I don't play it every year, but, like, I return to it every, like, 2 or 3 years, and it's just, it is such a good game. I will say, even for the horror veterans out there, even if you played some spooky games before, I don't know, man. I think even this one will put you on the edge of your seat. I know it did for me. And, you know, I've been playing, you know, games since, like, the PS1 era, right? Like, I grew up with, like, the OG Resident Evils, for example. But, man, yeah, this one, even for me, it put me on the edge of my seat and made me jump out of my seat several times. And, again, I can highly recommend the second game as well. Relies less on the horror elements, but it's still pretty spooky game. Next up, I just got a couple of honorable mentions I wanted to run through. We're not going to linger on these for too long, but the first one is Little Nightmares 1 and 2, Fatal Frame, Silent Hill, Dino Crisis. Y'all gotta play Dino Crisis. Amnesia, literally any of the Amnesia games. There was one that just came out a couple of months ago, right? A couple months ago? Yeah, The Bunker. That game was absolutely phenomenal, and yeah, that one also made me jump out of my seat a couple of times, but the whole Amnesia series is absolutely amazing. Oh, another one that I could also recommend by proxy while I'm thinking of it is Soma. Somebody could probably, Soma also makes me think of, like, Bioshock, and I was gonna recommend Bioshock on this list. I don't know if that's necessarily a Halloween game. It's kind of spooky. It's more about the atmosphere, really, more than, like, actual horror. But, you know, that's another one I can recommend, I guess. Outlast, Alan Wake, and also, like, the spin-off game that they had for that. Batman Arkham Asylum. That one, that's, like, out of all the Batman games, right? Like, I guess really any Batman game would be good for Halloween. But there's something about Arkham Asylum where I always go to it during Halloween. It's just, it's perfect for that time of year. You know what I mean? Just the vibes in that game and the atmosphere is just, it's on point. And then, The Walking Dead, the Telltale games, I really wanted to recommend those just because, like, I feel like it's getting to that point where those games are old enough now, especially with, like, Season 1 and all that, where the newer generation of gamers, they just simply were either just being born or just happened to miss those games. So that's one that I want to highlight because, you know, those are games that I feel like everybody should play at least once, especially Season 1, at least Season 1. You can knock it out in maybe, like, I don't know, 9 or 10 hours tops. And it's divided up into 6 episodes if you count the DLC, but the base game, it's 5 episodes, roughly about an hour and a half, 2 hours each, and then you have the DLC afterwards, but man, it is such an amazing game. It's definitely a tearjerker by the end. And then the last game I wanted to recommend as like an honorable mention is Luigi's Mansion. Literally any of the Luigi's Mansion games, even if you just pick up like Luigi's Mansion 3 for the Nintendo Switch, all of them are amazing, and it's just, oh man, I'm so excited for that Luigi's Mansion 2 remake that they're doing, but I also wonder if they're going to do like a remake for Luigi's Mansion 1. Because Luigi's Mansion 2, the remake they're doing, it's more or less just like a remaster to the Switch, but I wonder if they're going to do like a full maybe not even a 1-to-1, but just like a full from the ground up remake for Luigi's Mansion 1, and that's why they haven't done it yet. Maybe they're waiting to do that with the Nintendo Switch 2, so they can kind of have like that one game that like shows off the power of the next Switch or whatever their next console is going to be. But regardless, those are my honorable mentions. Those are just some games that I wanted to highlight. And finally, the last game on my list is going to be, once again, kind of like 2 games, and by proxy, like 20 games. But anyway, Resident Evil 1. So the trailer that I'm going to put on screen is the Resident Evil 1 remake, because as much as I would love to recommend and say, hey, go out and play the original, there's a couple of issues. So first off, not only is the original one not necessarily as easily accessible, the only real ways that I can think of to play it outside of, emulation and those means, would be through like PlayStation Plus Premium, for example, or if you have a PS3 still and you like buy it through the PSN store. So due to accessibility reasons, and on the other hand, I understand, there's a couple elements about the first game, depending on what version you pick up, it can be a little dicey. Like if you get the original version, obviously there's no auto-aim, which can make the game a bit harder than it needs to be, and then if you get the one director's cut version, specifically like the DualShock director's cut, then you have like that awful soundtrack. So, as much as I want to recommend that original game, there's too many factors at play for me to definitively say go play the original without having to, like put in a bunch of asterisks besides that as to what specific version you need to play. So for all intents and purposes, I'll say play the original one if you can, but if not, at least play the remake, as that is easily accessible on literally every platform under the sun, the Switch, the PC, Xbox, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Series X, S1, 360, like, no matter what console you're on, you can play the Resident Evil 1 remakes on the GameCube. They even, like, put out a port on the Wii, so literally no matter where you're at, even if you're on a Wii U, like, you could play it anywhere. There's nothing I can say about Resident Evil 1 that hasn't been said before. It's one of my favorite horror games of all time. In fact, it was, like, basically the first horror game that I played that, really got me into the genre and what made me fall in love with Resident Evil way back in the day. Gosh, I feel so old. But by proxy, I could recommend really the entire Resident Evil series. Even the, some of the more action-packed ones like Resident Evil 6, even those are really good for Halloween time. But no matter what Resident Evil game you play, man, just Resident Evil in general is just such an amazing series. And like I said during the honorable mentions, another one I can recommend that's similar to this would be like Silent Hill. So if you've played every Resident Evil game and you're looking for something similar, I can highly recommend the Silent Hill games. And vice versa. If you played all the Silent Hill games and want something similar, I can highly recommend the Resident Evil games, especially like the early ones. But yeah, all of them are absolutely amazing. And hey, if you've been waiting to pick up Resident Evil 4 Remake, I'm sure it's going to go on sale soon. And if it hasn't, then keep your eyes out, during like Black Friday and such. I'm sure it's going to go on sale. But it's definitely the perfect game for this time of year, man. Resident Evil 4 Remake, easily my game of the year. But anyway, that was 5. Technically like 20 or 25 games that I can recommend that you guys play this Halloween. So now I definitely love to hear from you guys. What are some games that you tend to play during this time of year? What are some games that you would recommend to somebody during this time of year? Whatever it is, whatever thing, and I definitely love to hear from you guys.
What's going on, guys? And for the OGs of this channel, you guys are definitely gonna remember this series or this style of series. Basically, this was like a type of video that I used to make where I literally just sit down, talk with you guys for a bit, throw some gameplay on the screen, and just, go back in time and look at some nostalgic games, some underrated games, some hidden gems, and everything in between. And today, specifically, we're gonna be looking at 5 licensed games on the PS2. It is worth noting that some of these games are also available on things like the GameCube or the original Xbox or have been remastered, but just to keep things simple, we're just gonna be specifically looking at the PS2 versions of these games. Now, these games aren't in any particular order or anything like that. I just kind of had these written down in like, whatever order I thought of them in. And there were so many that I wanted to include in this video, but I'll save those for a second video if you guys end up enjoying this one. First things first, we're going to start with The Godfather, the game. Where do I even begin with this game? So this is essentially based off of the first movie, and it is worth noting that there is a sequel to this game, The Godfather 2, on Xbox 360 and PS3, and I believe there was a PC version, but it obviously has been delisted since it's like a licensed property. So if you want to find that game, I'd highly recommend just going to eBay or Mercari or something like that on the 360 or PS3. But anyway, going back to The Godfather, the game. Again, this is based off of the first movie. I would say loosely, but I mean, it does follow it pretty closely. One of the things that I love about this game is that, during this story, when you're hitting these certain plot points, instead of certain characters taking out certain tasks, your character that you created is the one that actually plants the pistol there. And then at another point in the game, you're the one that plants like the horse. Well, not your character specifically, but you help another character plant the horse head in the bed. I'm gonna gonna try not to go too deep with like character names and stuff, because I know that stuff can kind of be considered spoilers. But a lot of those like important moments from the movie, I would say like all the important moments and plot points and like, you know, iconic moments from the movie are definitely all here and pretty faithfully recreated, or, you know, but have like a slight twist put on them in the game. That's not to mention all the other cool gameplay mechanics, like you have the whole like business and racketeering side of things, where there's businesses all over this game's map, and basically there's 4 families in the game. Well, technically 5 in total if you count your family, the Corleones, but there's 4 other families in the game, and each family is going to be running different businesses, and what you try to do is you try to go in, extort all these different businesses, take them from the other families, which then leads to later in the game where you can go and take out like their compounds, which then once you take out their compounds, well, they're no longer a threat, and once you take out all the other 4 families, then you're the Don of NYC. That's more or less endgame stuff though. Like, you can complete the main story of the game without, you know, becoming Don, but if you complete the game and you complete the story and you're looking for a little bit more, well then, you know, that's another fun thing that you could go and take on. Not to mention the fact that I'm just a sucker for this time period. I've always loved like mafia and mob stories, you know, you got the suits and the Tommy guns and stuff. It's just, man, I love stuff like that. That's one of the many reasons that I also love the Mafia trilogy, which, man, those games are absolutely amazing. If you haven't played those, Mafia Definitive Edition, and then Mafia 2 also got a Definitive Edition a bit ago, and Mafia 3, those are all just amazing games right there. I could go on and on about this game. I absolutely love it. It's super nostalgic for me, but yeah, if you haven't played it before, I highly recommend it. It's available on like Wii, PS2, original Xbox, Xbox 360, PS, it's all over the place. So, you know, if you don't have a PS2, you can still find other ways to play it. Next up, we got SpongeBob SquarePants, the movie game. Now, you know, obviously when it comes to licensed games, I could have easily talked about Battle for Bikini Bottom, but I really do feel like the movie game just isn't talked about or represented enough, so that's why we're talking about it here today. Basically, the movie game is like the unofficial sequel to Battle for Bikini Bottom. A lot of the things that you saw or did in Battle for Bikini Bottom, you're going to be doing here. One thing I will say is that there's not as many playable characters, but that obviously makes sense with the plot of the movie. You're only going to be playing as SpongeBob or Patrick in a given thing. And one other thing I will note, well, actually, before we get to the negatives, let's just go over all the positives, okay? So again, you're going to be doing a lot of the stuff that you're going to be doing in Battle for Bikini Bottom, except this one, rather than being like a semi-open hub world type of thing, this is more of a linear game, more of a level-based thing. But, and this is one of the things that kind of ties into one of the negatives, you can kind of like go back and go to any of the levels at any point and take on certain challenges, sort of like you would in Battle for Bikini Bottom. But that's kind of where one of the negatives comes in, and really my only negative with this game is that it's one of those licensed games where it's going to force you to repeat content towards the end of the game, where it's like, hey, you don't have enough golden spatulas, and now we need you to go back and do a bunch of these challenges in the previous levels in order to get enough to, you know, progress through the game story, which honestly isn't that big of a deal, because there was sort of like that same thing at play in Battle for Bikini Bottom. It feels like especially apparent in this game, but it's not like you necessarily have to 100% the game to beat it or anything like that, but you do have to come pretty close. I'm pretty sure it's like a solid 70 to 80% that you got to get through. And again, for some people that might be a little annoying if you just want to see the story and you get the game over with, but for others like completionists, that's not going to be a big deal anyway. For me personally, it wasn't that big of an annoyance. It literally only added like, I don't know, maybe like an extra hour onto the game, because, you know, you do earn a lot of the things that you need to keep progressing through the story just as you naturally play. There was only like a couple of instances where I had to go back and go out of my way to actually get those things. So even if you know, like, even if it sounds bad, it really isn't that bad at all. Otherwise, this is literally everything that you love from Battle for Bikini Bottom and just more of it. Like, it's an absolutely amazing game, and it's a shame that not as many people talk about this one, because this really was like the unofficial sequel to Battle for Bikini Bottom before we got the Cosmic Shake. This is another one that's available on multiple platforms, so if you haven't tried it before, just, you know, if you have any of the platforms that it's available on, I can highly recommend it. It's so much fun. Next up, we got Batman Begins, or what I like to call Arkham Before Arkham. So, where do I even begin with this game? This obviously follows the plot pretty faithfully-ish. There is a couple of deviations, but it does hit a lot of the plot points in the movie, considering that it does actually use clips from the movie inside of the game. Again, this is basically Arkham Before Arkham. Obviously, it doesn't have the Arkham-style combat, but when it comes to, like, stealth and level progression and some of the things that you see here, you really see how this game kind of in a way planted the seeds for Arkham Asylum. It's just astonishing to me how little people actually know about this game. Like, a lot of people that I've talked to, very few of them have actually known about this game or played this game or even seen it or heard about it before. It is honestly great, and when you look at the graphics at the time, like, it looks like an early 360, early PS3 game. Like, you know, I was actually pretty shocked to find out, oh, this was like only for 6th-gen consoles. The combat is pretty fun and pretty satisfying. The animations can be a little floaty looking at times. They're not necessarily enough to take you out of the experience, but they do look a little floaty compared to like Arkham Asylum, where like every animation and every sound effect, you can almost feel that fizz going through that goon's face. But still, the combat's satisfying. They give you a lot of cool tools, you know, in Batman's arsenal to mess around with and use to progress through the levels and solve certain puzzles. So, well, there's not really that many puzzles. I mean, there's like a couple puzzle-esque things to get through the environments, but it's not that puzzle-heavy of a game. There's barely any, and even for the ones that there kind of are, they're not actual puzzles. They're more like traversal puzzles, I guess, if you could even call them that, and they're not complicated. You're not gonna get stuck on anything if you're bad at puzzles like I am. Not to mention the 2 Batmobile sections in the game, which are literally just Burnout, but in Batman, like, you're literally using the Batmobile, but you have, like, the same boost and takedown mechanics as, like, Burnout Revenge, which, let me just say, that's, like, a whole other thing. Maybe I can make a video on, like, racing games I need to come back, because I'm telling you right now, the whole Burnout series, that would be top of the list. Please give me a Burnout Dominator remake where we get every single version of Avril Lavigne's girlfriend back in the game. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, in the game Burnout Dominator, there's literally, like, every language version of Avril Lavigne's girlfriend in the game. You got, like, Japanese, Spanish, English. I don't know why, but I mean, hey, all of them still sound great regardless. Anyways, yeah, Batman Begins, again, the gameplay is great. The Batmobile sections are probably, honestly, debatably, maybe even my favorite parts of the game. And then you got, like, the boss battles in the game, which are all pretty fun. Again, none of them are too difficult, but it's just cool facing off against those movie villains in game. And yeah, if you haven't played this one before, it's still pretty cheap. You can get on, like, original Xbox, PS2, all that. So, yeah, another one that I highly recommend, obviously, since it's in this video. Next up, we got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the 2003 game that is based off of, you know, the 2003 cartoon, which, let me just say, a lot of nostalgia there. Grew up on that one. To put it in the simplest of terms, this is a 3D brawler, and while this may look like, you know, somewhat generic or simple, and, you know, I know some games that are similar to this, I get some criticism, would be like Batman Rise of Sinzu or Spider-Man Friend or Foe, where it's like, it's just these button-mashy 3D brawlers, but I promise, Turtles, this game is sort of like Turtles in Time in 3D, to where it looks simple on its surface, but there is a lot of depth to the game. There's a lot of mechanics that you gotta grasp and learn, and honestly, it is so much fun, and it gets to be surprisingly challenging at certain points. Me personally, when I play the game, I go with Michelangelo. That's just the one that I've always went with when I play this game. There's just something about his moveset. It just, the whole eat feet, eat feet, eat feet. If you played the game, you know what I'm talking about. When you're facing off against the 2 mouse robots at the end, you just spam the same move with the twirling nunchucks and the feet going, eat feet, eat feet, eat feet. This is another one of those games that actually includes clips from the show as well to, like, string everything together. Gosh, I can't even speak English. This entire game is basically based off of a good portion of Season 1, not the entirety of Season 1, but a good portion of it, and again, it's going to be stringing you along with actual clips from the show, so it stays pretty close to the show's storyline. It only deviates ever so slightly, and even when it does, it finds its way back to the show pretty quickly. There's a bit of a combo system going, so for most of the game, you're probably just going to be mashing A or X just to kind of do, like, the basic combos, but then you can do this thing where, like, you know, you hit X a couple of times and you hit square. Sometimes you'll do an X square to stun an enemy, sometimes you do an XX square to do, like, a whole ground thing, or the whole, like, area of effect and knock all the enemies away. Sometimes you'll do a XXX square, so then you can hit him a couple of times and hit him with, like, a nunchuck spin, and then other times you're going to be, like, spamming L2 to dodge out of the way. For some bosses, you'll want to go up and hit them as much as you can. For some enemies, you want to do, like, you know, the whole area of effect thing. For some, they're really quick, so you just want to hit them with the XXX and get moving to the next guy. For some bosses, sometimes you might not even want to fight them. Sometimes you might want to dash away and spam them with the fire stars. And another cool thing is that no matter which turtle you choose, because obviously you can choose between any of the turtles, or if you have cheat codes, you know, you can play as other characters like Splinter. While not each campaign is 100% unique, each turtle does actually have, like, unique levels or unique bosses to each one. Like, if you play as Raphael, for example, you can face off against Casey Jones. And that doesn't happen if you play as any of the other turtles. And there's, like, unique things like that for each of the turtles. So it is actually worth going through and playing as each of the turtles. And the game really isn't that long. It can take you anywhere from 3 to 8 hours. It just depends on how good or bad you are, really. I don't want to go too much more in depth about this game, but yeah, if you have any nostalgia for the 2003 show like I do, just, you know, even seeing the cartoon clips in game is enough for me to this day to just get on and be like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm, like, playing inside of the show, but it's the game, and it's just... there's also 2 sequels to this game. You got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Battle Nexus, as well as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Mutant Mayhem. All 3 of these are absolutely amazing games, and there's also, like, other versions of them. Like, you got the GBA versions, which are literally just, like, Turtles in Time type games, except on GBA. They're, like, completely different. They're 2D beat-em-ups, but they're absolutely amazing as well. If you haven't played any of these games before, please do yourself a favor and pick them up and try. And for the final game of the day, we have Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. For anybody that knows me knows I love Star Wars, and you probably probably already knew that this was coming, but man, Star Wars Episode 3, this is one of the most, like, low-key, underrated Star Wars games, which is really, like, odd when you think about it, because it's based on one of, like, you know, the movies. There's a couple of reasons that I love this game so much, so we'll just kind of try to pinpoint it. Like, it's so hard for me to talk about some of these games because there's so much at play that I feel like my brain is just becoming, like, jello as I'm talking about it, because there's so many things that I want to touch on, but I also don't want to spoil things. So first off, the story. The story literally follows the movie, basically beat for beat. You're going to be going through and hitting, like, all of the important things that happens in the movie. And yes, that includes the epic final battle between Anakin and Obi-Wan, which, there's one thing I'll say, is where the normal end of the game does follow the normal ending of the movie, but there is an alternate ending that you unlock when you beat the game, and let me just say that it's, like, kind of funny, even though it's not. It's just like, you don't expect it to happen, that it kind of catches you off guard. The gameplay in this game is essentially like almost like a God of War type of thing, except with Star Wars. It's not as fast or as like slashy as like God of War or DMC would be, but it's still like, it has that same combo system, like square, square, square X, or square, square triangle, and you know, you're like, you know, doing all these different moves and combos and stuff like that to get through the game, and it's very, you know, hacky and slashy, but it's not just hacking and slashing. Like, there's still like platforming type elements, and you know, like you traversing through the levels and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, I don't want to say a 3D platformer, but it, you know, I just want to say, you know, like beat 'em up action adventure type of game. And obviously it's also got all the iconic music and characters from the movie. And then there's a few other things I want to highlight. Not only do you get these awesome bonus levels after you beat the game, where you can actually play through the, you know, the lightsaber duel between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan from Episode 4, A New Hope, but there is also an insane versus mode where you get to use the, because the lightsabers in this game, I don't want to say it's like, oh, it's so super in-depth, but it kind of is. There is like more than it would seem on the surface. Like, when it comes to like combos and blocks and different ways that you can deflect certain attacks or counter certain attacks, and you know, like certain combos you can pull off and how it affects certain enemies and their weaknesses and stuff, like it's surprisingly in-depth, and you get to use all of that in a versus mode where like you and a buddy could just sit down, couch co-op, slash it out, and it's just, oh man, it is so much fun because you have a great roster of characters to play with, and it's just, I mean, it's absolutely epic. This is one of those things where, like, if kids nowadays love Star Wars and, you know, like, say outside of Battlefront 2, they want another game where it's just like, okay, because, like, Battlefront 2, as much as I love that game, when it comes to lightsaber duels, it mostly does rely on, like, special abilities more than actual, like, lightsaber combos, because when it comes to the combos, obviously, most of the time, you're just kind of slashing RT or R2, depending on your console, and then, you know, you're doing, like, your special abilities to kind of, like, level the playing field. But in, like, if you were looking for a game where you wanted to actually rely more on lightsaber skill and combos and stuff like that, I could highly recommend Episode 3, because again, there's like all these different combos and things at play, and it's more based on the lightsaber combat rather than the abilities that come with like the lightsaber and the force abilities. But don't get it twisted, you do still have force abilities, so keep that in mind. Things can get pretty chaotic pretty quick, but Star Wars Episode 3, there's so much that I could say about it, but again, with a lot of these games, it's better that I say less and let you guys experience it for yourself and just kind of give you enough to, you know, hopefully get your foot in the door, get you excited, get you thinking about playing it, maybe, you know, picking it up physically. Again, these games weren't necessarily in any order, but like Star Wars Episode 3, this is definitely one of them where it's like, man, if you haven't played this, you gotta try it at least once. And for anybody interested or curious, it is also backwards compatible on Xbox Series X and Xbox One. So if you have one of those consoles, you don't have any reason not to pick it up, because yes, it is still available digitally and physical copies are very cheap. Anyways, with that, I think that's all my thoughts. I don't know, my brain feels like mush, it feels like jello. I have OCD and ADHD, so when those two things combine, when I'm trying to talk about, you know, things that I love, it gets real crazy real quick. So I hope that this was like somewhat coherent and cohesive, and it was like easy enough to understand, and hopefully enough to help you guys get excited to try out some of these games, or at least consider trying out some of these games. At the very least, I got to put these games on your guys' radar, and you know, that's all that my goal is. That's all that I want to do. But if you guys take it a step further and end up trying these games and falling in love with any of them, then obviously that would make me like super happy. And if you guys end up doing that, please let me know down in the comments, because I would genuinely love to get that conversation going with you guys, because obviously I have a lot of nostalgia for these games. I grew up with these games, but like, you know, if I could just like hear other people's first times playing the games nowadays, or like hearing their experiences falling in love with these games that I've loved for so long, just, I don't know, just few things would make me happier. But again, if you guys enjoyed this style of video, and if you guys would want these kind of videos to return, because I used to do them all the time, just let me know. I would be more than happy to bring these like style of videos back, because I have way more games that I could just sit here and gush about. I'm a wellspring of video game knowledge and history. This is like, in a way, kind of like my life's work. Like, I love video games so much, so like, getting to sit here and gush about games like this, I can literally do this all day, every day. But anyways, always massive shout out, thank you to all the Patreons and channel members. Thank you to all you in the low baller tier, new maker shout out, thank you to all you in the mid baller tier, Mellow asking me, Daddy Manny, the biggest shout out, thanks to all you in the G tier, Run Adventure, Selling Cheese Curl. Thank you guys so much. You guys are literal legends. I love you. Thank you guys for watching. Have an amazing day. Stay beautiful. I love you all. Peace.